Chapter 31. The missions in the blood-colored jade slips were all group missions, not something any assassin could complete alone. Even the gold-masked assassins could not complete the mission. At this moment, the blood-colored jade slips were picked up by a tall figure covered in a pitch-black cloak. The figure stood there, emitting a gloomy and cold aura. He held the blood-colored jade slips in one hand and a ferocious sickle that was 3 feet taller than him in the other. He looked like the god of death. One of the 4 judges of Bloodthirst Tower, the Demon Judge. The real upper echelons of Bloodthirst Tower, apart from the Tower Master and Vice Tower Master, were the Blood Judge, Shadow Judge, Ghost Judge, and Demon Judge. The mission in the blood-colored jade slips is led by the Demon Judge. It seems that the difficulty and danger of the mission are extraordinary. The blood-colored jade slips have appeared several times before, but they were all led by gold-masked assassins. This time, the Demon Judge is taking the lead. It must be extremely dangerous. Many silver-masked and iron-masked assassins whispered to each other and discussed. "Quiet," the Demon Judge whispered. His voice was not loud, but the entire underground space fell into a deathly silence. In Bloodthirst Tower, the judge's dignity was not to be violated. "This mission will be led by me. Including the 5 gold-masked assassins, we need 15 silver-masked assassins and 50 iron-masked assassins. Those who want to participate can come and register, but you must think carefully. If you are not careful, you may lose your life." The Demon Judge's voice echoed in the underground space, and soon, many assassins exclaimed. Even Yiguchin was slightly surprised. Putting aside the Demon Judge, whose strength was unfathomable, just the 5 gold-masked assassins and 15 silver-masked assassins were enough. That was 5 experts in the life and death chamber and 15 experts in the divine soul realm. Even the 5 great aristocratic families of the Milky Way province would not be able to come up with such a lineup. Are they going to exterminate the whole clan? But even so, this lineup is too extravagant. Yiguchin thought to himself. However, the more such a lineup was brought out, the more dangerous this mission was. For a moment, many of the assassins were speechless and hesitant. Seeing that no one responded, the Demon Judge snorted coldly and then said, "Because this mission is quite risky, we'll make an exception this time. The Iron Mask assassins who participate in this mission have a chance to enter the first 8 of the 18 blood prison, and they can go before the mission starts." Hiss! As soon as these words came out, the entire underground space was deathly silent at first, and then suddenly there was a burst of exclamations. The Gold Mask Assassin and the Silver Mask Assassin were both very powerful. It was not very difficult for them to fill the blood guillotine and enter the 18 blood prison. But for the Iron Mask Assassin, it would be difficult to enter the 18 blood prison. It would take a long time. Right now, participating in a blood mission and entering the first 8 levels of the 18 blood prison was like a pie falling from the sky. The 18 blood prison was the core secret area of Blood Listening Tower. It was a place that all assassins yearned for. According to rumor, one would be able to comprehend the Azura sword intent after passing through the 18th level of the blood prison. However, besides the mysterious Tower Master, no one in the entire Bloodthirst Tower had been able to pass through the 18th level. But this did not mean that the Azura sword intent was the only opportunity in the 18 blood prison. There were a total of 18 levels in the 18 blood prison. It was rumored that there were many opportunities in each level. It could be a sword technique, a secret technique, a supreme-grade spirit weapon, a cultivation technique, and so on. It was also because of this that all the assassins of Blood Listening Tower were scrambling for the 18 blood prison. Even if they knew that they might not be able to pass through the 18th level and comprehend the Azura sword intent, they could at least obtain other opportunities. After the Demon Judge threw out this temptation, the breathing of many assassins in the underground space became heavier. Clearly, this benefit was very tempting. But they were not stupid. If they wanted to obtain something, they might have to pay more. His life was in danger during this mission. No matter how good the opportunity was, it was superfluous if they did not have the life to enjoy it. Amidst this deathly silence, a slightly hoarse voice suddenly opened its mouth. I'll go. Many of the assassins, including Yi Gu-chen, looked over. The one who had spoken was an iron-faced assassin. However, he had blood-red hair, and his whole body exuded a bloody aura. Red-haired ghost. It's really him, a lunatic who doesn't care about his life. A lot of whispers suddenly sounded. Red-haired ghost was ranked 13th on the Heaven Pride list. He was eccentric, cold, and bloodthirsty. In a way, he was somewhat similar to Yi Gu-chen, who had transformed into the sword demon. But Yi Gu-chen only wanted to fill up the blood guillotine in exchange for a chance to comprehend the Azura sword intent. Red-haired ghost was purely murderous. I'll go too. Another cold female voice rang out. It was Nightingale. Ever since Yi Gu-chen joined Blood Listening Tower, he and Nightingale had not interacted. They minded their own business. Me too. Yi Gu-chen did not hesitate. He had joined Blood Listening Tower to enter the 18 Blood Prison and comprehend the Azura sword intent. Now that he had the opportunity to enter the 18 Blood Prison, even if only the first 8 levels were opened, it was very important for Yi Gu-chen. It could lay a foundation for him to pass through the 18 Blood Prison in the future. Red-haired ghost, Nightingale, sword demon. Apart from the most mysterious Yu Shicho, who rarely appeared and rarely accepted missions, the other 3 Heaven Prides on the Heaven Pride list had all accepted the Blood Red mission. With Yi Gu-chen and the others taking the lead, the required manpower was soon gathered. The mission was set to take place a month later. A few days later, Yi Gu-chen and the others would be led by the demon judge to the most mysterious 18 Blood Prison in Blood Listening Tower. Very quickly, a few days passed. The demon judge brought Yi Gu-chen and the other assassins who had participated in the mission to a territory. The Chilling Wind Hills. The Chilling Wind Hills was one of the most dangerous places in the Saint Origin dynasty. Gusts of chilling wind roamed the place all year round. Even a chi refining master would be torn to shreds in an instant if they were caught in the chilling wind. Therefore, there were very few traces of cultivators and demonic beasts in the Chilling Wind Hills. However, many martial cultivators had died in the chilling wind, leaving behind many yuan rings, treasures, spiritual weapons and the like. From time to time, some cultivators would come here to take the risk and pick up the leftovers. From afar, Yi Gu-chen could vaguely see gusts of chilling wind forming a tornado that swept back and forth across the hills. The cold and fierce undulations made Yi Gu-chen frown slightly. However, under the demon judge's lead, the Blood Listening Tower group did not encounter any chilling wind. After an unknown period of time, the demon judge led the group of assassins into the depths of the Chilling Wind Hills. The chilling wind here was even denser and had almost no pattern. Let alone a chi refinement grandmaster, even a divine spirit realm expert could die here if they were not careful. However, the demon judge still avoided the chilling wind as if he could predict the future. Finally, after a period of time, the demon judge suddenly stopped in his tracks. This was already the deepest part of the Chilling Wind Hills. It was difficult for ordinary experts to set foot here. The demon judge took out a blood-red token. This token seemed to be made of blood. An eye was engraved on it, looking incomparably terrifying. 18 Blood Prison, open. The demon judge poured his genuine chi into the blood-red token. Yi Gu-chen looked around and saw that the surrounding land was flat. There were no mountains or caves. Just as Yi Gu-chen was puzzled, a loud rumbling sound came from underground. Then, rays of blood-red light shot out from the ground, intertwining with each other and forming complex and unpredictable trajectories. Streaks of mysterious blood-red lines appeared on the ground. Then, a crack suddenly appeared on the ground. The crack grew bigger and bigger until it formed an almost bottomless pitch-black cave. A lonely spiral of old stairs extended into the deepest part of the darkness. Some of the assassins had entered the 18 Blood Prison for the first time, so they naturally did not know that the 18 Blood Prison was underground. Let's go, the demon judge said coldly. Yi Gu-chen and the others walked down the stone steps, and the light around them was swallowed up. After walking for an unknown period of time, Yi Gu-chen felt that they should have reached the bottom. In front of them was a huge bronze stone door. The bronze stone door was mottled and simple, with traces of blood red, looking as if it had been stained with blood. Vaguely, there seemed to be wisps of chilling wind howling from inside the door, which made one's hair stand on end. This is the first floor of the 18 blood prison. If you are ready, enter. You only have one chance. Those who have the ability can break through to the 8th floor. If you can't hold on, you can withdraw and save your life, the demon judge said in a low and hoarse voice. As his voice fell, the blood-stained bronze stone door rumbled open, and a cold and gloomy aura spread out from within. Go. The demon judge waved his hand, and many of the assassins participating in this mission, including Yiguchin, entered without hesitation. Chapter 32. After all the assassins had entered, the bronze door closed with a bang. Beside the demon judge, a slender and graceful figure appeared without a sound. The figure was dressed in tight black clothes, and the curves of her body made one's mouth dry. Her face was covered with a layer of black veil, revealing only a pair of pitch-black eyes that were like stars. Yuli, what brings you here? The demon judge said indifferently. Surprisingly, this veiled woman was one of the 4 judges of Bloodthirst Tower, Judge Nether, Yuli. I'm here to see how far the little guy who is valued by the Tower Lord can go, Yuli said lazily. Yiguchin, the former young sword master. I heard that he joined Tingxua Tower for the Azura sword essence in the 18 blood prison, the demon judge said. The first few levels of the 18 blood prison are fine. It's just a test of strength. The later levels are the real test of soul and will. Yuli's tone was solemn. Obviously, as judges, they had also passed through the 18 blood prison, but even with their cultivation, they could not pass through it completely. The horror of the last few levels still made Yuli feel a lingering fear. If he wants to get the Azura sword essence, let's see if he has the ability. The demon judge shook his head. The first level of the 18 blood prison. When Yiguchin and the others entered, they found that this place was a dim space. It was filled with light blue fog, and it looked cold and strange. Yiguchin had heard before that the 18 blood prison was a test of soul and will. In such an environment, ordinary people would have trembled and their hearts would be pounding. But fortunately, the assassins of Tingxua Tower were all cold-blooded, so none of them made a fool of themselves. After walking for a short while, Yiguchin saw many coffins that were placed in a disorderly manner. Coffins? Just as Yiguchin was feeling puzzled, the lids of the coffins suddenly burst open. Corpses filled with a rotten aura shot toward the assassins of the bloodthirsty tower with a ghostly aura. These corpses had scarlet eyes and a brass luster on their bodies. They looked extremely sturdy. This is a corpse puppet. Yiguchin recognized him. The so-called corpse puppets were puppets that were refined from corpses. This kind of heartless method was loathed and despised by many. Generally, only evil spirits would steal the corpses of cultivators and refine them into corpse puppets. However, Bloodhark Tower was never a righteous organization. Whoosh! A blood-red figure attacked. It was the red-haired ghost. Clearly, this was not his first time entering the 18 blood prison. He seemed to be quite familiar with the place. The red-haired ghost's weapon was a blood-red scythe with a chain attached to it. The scythe tore through the air and instantly beheaded a zombie. After the corpse puppet was beheaded, a fist-sized blood-red blob of light suddenly flew to the red-haired ghost's body and fused with it. The next moment, the red-haired ghost's life aura rose slightly. Could that be life essence? Yiguchin was surprised. Cultivators cultivated all year round and had strong physiques and rich life essence. The reason why these corpse puppets could be as nimble as ordinary people, apart from the puppet imprint on their bodies, was because of the life essence. Of course, life essence could also be absorbed by others to strengthen their blood chi and physique. The 18 blood prison is indeed filled with opportunities. It's not just the Azura sword intent, Yiguchin thought. Although he had transcended the second blood tribulation and cultivated the tendon's metamorphosis scripture, making his blood chi, flesh, and bones extremely strong, he did not mind having more. The next moment, Yiguchin attacked as well. He held the supreme grade spirit artifact, the flying guillotine, and poured his essence into it. 15 blood-red artifact meridians lit up. The sharp sword chi was fluctuating. Yiguchin drew his sword directly. The blood-red blade was so fast that only a blurry shadow could be seen. It was the connate sword art that all assassins of Bloodhark Tower cultivated, the shadow sword art. Puchi. Although the corpse puppets' bodies were very tough, they could not withstand Yiguchin's sword move. Yiguchin estimated that the strength of these brass corpse puppets was roughly equivalent to an expert at the peak of the essence realm. With Yiguchin's current strength, he could be considered one of the strongest in the chi refinement realm. Naturally, he was not afraid of these brass corpse puppets. After Yiguchin killed the corpse puppet, a ball of blood-red life essence merged into his body. Yiguchin raised his eyebrows slightly. He found that not only did his blood chi become more vigorous, but it also transformed into more essence chi. If he killed more corpse puppets, Yiguchin's cultivation realm might increase again. Since he had accepted the blood mission, the stronger he was, the better. Yiguchin let loose and used the shadow sword art. Sword shadows flashed as balls of life essence continuously merged into his body. Yiguchin's cultivation realm also rose step by step. As time passed, Yiguchin's cultivation gradually climbed to the peak of the 7th stage of the essence realm. He was only one step away from the 8th stage. However, sometimes, the difference between realms was just a thin layer. This won't do. Although the brass corpse puppet's life essence is vigorous, it's accumulated to the extreme. It won't be of much use to me. Just as Yiguchin was thinking in his heart, exclamations suddenly came from not far away. There were several extremely black coffins in front of him. As the assassins of Bloodhark Tower arrived, they exploded one after another. Wisps of dark silver light burst out. They were 5 corpse puppets. However, unlike the brass corpse puppet from before, these 5 corpse puppets were dark silver in color, and their physiques gave off a sense of indestructible strength. The scarlet in their eyes was even more intense than the brass corpse puppets. The surrounding murderous aura surged like waves. Silver corpse puppets. If the brass corpse puppet's strength was comparable to the peak of the essence realm, then the silver corpse puppet's strength was comparable to a true chi refinement grandmaster. Moreover, it wasn't the kind that had just broken through to the chi refinement realm. It was at least comparable to the 3rd cycle of the chi refinement realm. The life essence contained in these corpse puppets was far superior to the brass corpse puppets. However, although many Iron Mask assassins coveted the life essence in the silver corpse puppets, they were clearly not as easy to deal with as the brass corpse puppets. Although these Iron Mask assassins were also chi refinement grandmasters, corpse puppets did not feel pain. They were like ice-cold killing machines. Compared to martial cultivators, their methods were more direct and ruthless. Puchi. A first-cycle chi refinement realm Iron Mask assassin was sent flying by a silver corpse puppet with a single punch. He vomited blood non-stop. Kill. A cold word came from the red-haired ghost's mouth. He was ranked 13th on the Heaven's Pride list. His strength and methods were clearly incomparable to ordinary chi refinement grandmasters. He directly charged towards a silver corpse puppet. On the other side, Nightingale, who had broken through to the 3rd cycle chi refinement realm, also attacked a silver corpse puppet. It seems that I'll have to kill a silver corpse puppet if I want to break through. Yiguchin did not stay idle. He poured his chi essence into the blood guillotine. Blood-red vessels snaked out one after another, flickering with blood-red light. Swoosh! He thrust his sword forward. It was the moon-piercing sword art's ultimate move, Shooting Star-Piercing Moon. Yiguchin struck a silver corpse puppet. However, when the tip of his sword touched the silver corpse puppet's body, a crisp sound of metal clashing rang out. An extremely strong rebounding force swept towards Yiguchin. Yiguchin's expression changed slightly. He suddenly shook his wrist and neutralized the rebounding force. What a powerful body. Yiguchen was a little surprised. It seemed that the silver corpse puppet was not so easy to deal with. Boom! The silver corpse puppet was startled. It looked at Yiguchen and a blood-red light burst out from its eyes. It threw a punch at Yiguchen. Chapter 33. The silver fist cut through the air with an ear-piercing sonic boom. Even a normal chi refinement grandmaster would not be able to withstand such a powerful wave of energy. However, Yiguchen's lips curled into a faint smile. His most shocking move was not his cultivation level or sword technique, but his physical body. An extremely powerful physical body. After cultivating Yi scripture to the great success stage and passing the second minor tribulation of the blood tribulation of the physical body, Yiguchen's physical strength had reached an extremely terrifying level. Even without relying on chi, he could fight a chi refinement grandmaster head-on. Yiguchen's body surface faintly glowed with a golden light. At the same time, the chi and blood in his body roared. A layer of chi and blood flames rose on the surface of his body, faintly taking the shape of a dragon and elephant. After passing the second minor tribulation, not only was his physical recovery terrifying, but he also had the power of a dragon and elephant. Boom! Yiguchen did not use any fancy martial arts. He also punched out. Many assassins were stunned when they saw Yiguchen take on the silver corpse puppet head-on. Doesn't this sword demon know that the strongest part of a corpse puppet is its body, which is difficult to be injured by swords and sabers? Is the sword demon really suicidal to fight a corpse puppet in close combat? Boom! However, the following scene caused those voices of ridicule and doubt to come to an abrupt halt. Yiguchen's fist, which was faintly glowing with a golden light, collided with the silver corpse puppet's fist and exploded with a thunderous sound. A circle of invisible, transparent ripples spread out from the tip of the fist like a wave. Under the two attacks, Yiguchen and the silver corpse puppet were evenly matched. Then, Yiguchen was like a human-shaped Tyrannosaurus. His whole body was burning with blood flames, like a demon god of fire. Vaguely, his chi and blood formed the shape of a dragon and elephant, accompanying him as they collided with the silver corpse puppet. On the other side, the red-haired ghost burst out with the terrifying cultivation of the fourth cycle of the chi refinement realm and suppressed a silver corpse puppet. Nightingale was slightly weaker, but she was still able to fight evenly with the silver corpse puppet. The remaining two silver corpse puppets entered the crowd to look for targets. However, the Bloodthirst Tower's assassins were extremely swift, so they were barely able to deal with a single silver corpse puppet when 4 or 5 of them worked together. Clang! On the red-haired ghost's side, the blood-red chain scythe slashed through the air like a blood-red shadow. It continuously bombarded the silver corpse puppet's body, and white marks appeared on its hard silver body. On the other side, Yiguchen didn't want to continue fighting. He used the shadow sword technique, and the flying guillotine fell on the silver puppet's body like a bloody light. Then, chi and blood suddenly exploded on the blade of the flying guillotine, and bloody flames spread to the silver corpse puppet. The corpse puppet did not feel any pain, so it did not feel anything. However, its refined body quietly began to soften and fester. Chi and blood flames had a strong suppressive effect on the body's chi and blood. It could even be used as fuel to burn, and it was very difficult to extinguish. The silver corpse puppet did not have any chi, but its body was strong. It just so happened that Yiguchen could restrain it. As time passed, more and more festers appeared on the silver corpse puppet's body. Its entire body was engulfed in a ball of blood-red chi and blood flames. Kill! Yiguchen's sword struck out like a clap of thunder. It was the horizontal lightning sword technique. A blood-red bolt of lightning streaked across the sky and directly cut off the silver corpse puppet's head. After being burned by the chi and blood flames, the corpse puppet's body was no longer as strong as before. Then, an extremely thick ball of life essence, like rolling red lava, entered Yiguchen's body. As this extremely thick ball of life essence entered his body, Yiguchen felt the chi and blood in his body explode, rolling like waves. Every blood vessel in his body was surging with chi and blood. Soon, Yiguchin's body shook, and his bones emitted a thunderous sound. His cultivation had reached the 8th level of the essence stage. The aura of this breakthrough attracted the attention of many bloodthirsty tower assassins. However, when they sensed Yiguchin's aura, their eyes were filled with shock. What? Sword Demon has just broken through to the 8th level of the essence stage. How is it possible? He's only at the essence stage, but his combat strength is on par with the chi refinement stage. Moreover, his body is too strong. I'm afraid that even an ordinary chi refinement stage grandmaster can't compare to him. Yiguchin's breakthrough shocked the group. Even the red-haired ghost glanced at Yiguchin. As for Nightingale, she had already experienced Yiguchin's power, so she just snorted coldly. After that, the red-haired ghost and Nightingale each destroyed 2 silver corpse puppets, while the remaining 2 silver corpse puppets were defeated by the group of assassins. The red-haired ghost and Nightingale did not break through after absorbing the life essence, but their bodies' chi and blood had become much more vigorous. Seeing that the corpse puppets were cleaned up, Yiguchin and the others did not linger and continued on. Soon, they reached the end of the first level of the 18-blood prison, where a mottled ancient stone door appeared in front of them. The door opened with a click, and a chilly wind blew in. All the assassins, including Yiguchin, did not hesitate. After tasting the sweetness of the life essence, they knew that there would be many opportunities in the 18-blood prison. The second level of the 18-blood prison. This level was a blood-red space. In this space, there were many blood-red shadows. These blood-red shadows were like ghosts. They were formless and formless. Even if they were cut apart by a sword or saber, they would scatter and gather again like mercury. And these blood-red phantoms could emit demon-like shrieks, which had the effect of disturbing one's mind. Soon, some of the assassins could not bear it anymore. They hugged their heads and wailed, and then could only helplessly retreat. However, this was only the second level of the 18-blood prison, so the sound waves that disturbed one's mind were not particularly strong. But for cultivators who had not even reached the divine soul realm, it was a huge pressure. Yiguchin also endured this mental pressure, but with his temperament as a sword demon in his previous life, this kind of disturbance was almost nothing. Moreover, Yiguchin vaguely felt that his soul and divine sense seemed to be faintly strengthened. Although Yiguchin had not reached the divine soul realm and had not opened his knowledge sea, he could still clearly feel this faint enhancement. Obviously, if one cultivated here for a long time, it would be very beneficial to the cultivation of their soul and divine sense. After some time, Yiguchin and a small number of assassins also broke through the second level of the 18-blood prison. Then came the third level. When Yiguchin entered this space, he was slightly stunned. Because he was the only one here. Are they all scattered? Yiguchin thought to himself. However, he did not hesitate and continued to walk forward. Strangely, after Yiguchin walked for a long time, there was not the slightest movement in this place, as if there was no test at all. Something was wrong. Yiguchin was keenly aware of a dangerous aura. Shio. Suddenly, there was an extremely subtle sound of wind breaking, and in an instant, it attacked the back of Yiguchin's neck. It was a dark sword. This sword was fast and lightless, as if it was hidden in space. And facing this sword that was almost certain to kill, Yiguchin did not seem to feel it, and did not even turn his head. Chapter 34. If it was anyone else, it would be excusable if they didn't react in time. However, Yiguchin had the keen senses of sword demon. He could detect the sound of a sword slicing through the void no matter how well it was hidden. However, Yiguchin didn't turn around. Instead, he slowly tightened his grip on the flying guillotine. Swoosh! The sword that came from behind dissipated like smoke when it came into contact with Yiguchin. In front of Yiguchin, a black sword was being held by a black-clothed man as he charged at Yiguchin. Interesting. The sneak attack from behind was just an illusion. If it was an ordinary person, they might have been deceived. Yiguchen's eyes were filled with interest. The sword attack from behind seemed both real and fake at the same time. However, Yiguchen felt that the sword attack was just a formality without any substance. The real killing intent was right in front of him. Now that Yiguchen was alone, Yiguchen could unleash his full strength without restraint. Yiguchen swung his sword. The sword chi was like an aurora. It was the Aurora Flash Sword's ultimate move, Aurora's passing. However, in the face of Yiguchen's fast sword attack, the black-clothed man took a step forward. His figure quietly dissipated like a sword shadow and hid in the darkness. This is... He actually combined a sword technique with a movement technique. Interesting. Yiguchen's eyes lit up. He had long sensed that the black-clothed man's sword technique was similar to the Blood Tower's shadow sword technique. However, it was obvious that the black-clothed man's sword technique was more profound than the shadow sword technique. This was because he had already combined a sword technique with a movement technique. In other words, the sword technique and movement technique were originally one. The shadow sword technique is a Xiantian sword technique that many assassins in Blood Tower practice. The sword technique in front of me must be a more advanced version of the shadow sword technique. In other words, the shadow sword technique is a simplified version of the sword technique in front of me. Yiguchen was even more curious. The shadow sword technique was already a Xiantian sword technique. Only spirit-level sword techniques were of a higher level. Opportunity. Yiguchen was certain that the swordsmanship displayed by the black-clothed man in front of him was the opportunity of this level. However, it was clear that in order to obtain this opportunity, he had to defeat the black-clothed man. Without hesitation, Yiguchen changed his sword spell and performed the piercing moon sword art. However, in Yiguchen's hands, even the most ordinary swordsmanship had a hint of returning to simplicity. Clang! 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 As the two clashed, sparks flickered in the void. Yiguchen poured his profound qi into the blood guillotine. The blood-red blade of the blood guillotine emitted layers of bloodthirsty light. The ultimate move of the piercing moon sword technique, Moonfall. In an instant, it was as if a blood-red crescent moon had appeared. That beautiful blood-red sword light swept towards the black-clothed man. It didn't look fast, but it arrived in front of the black-robed man in an instant. The black-clothed man waved his sword. Dark sword shadows spread out, as if there were thousands of dark sword shadows surging in the darkness. However, those sword shadows were easily destroyed by the blood-red crescent moon. Yiguchen wanted to end the battle quickly. He swung his sword again. The sword edge resonated with the void, and circles of invisible ripples spread out. In just a few breaths, 20 layers of transparent void sword waves swept out like waves. Vacuum sword wave, overlapping waves. Yiguchen's sword edge vibrated. The 20 layers of sword wave seemed to resonate with each other. They overlapped and fell on the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man was almost unable to resist and his body was annihilated in an instant. Looking at the black-clothed man who had completely disappeared without leaving a trace, Yiguchen frowned slightly. However, not long after, a black stone tablet suddenly appeared at the end of Yiguchen's line of sight. Yiguchen walked closer to take a look and found that a swordsmanship was indeed recorded on the stone tablet. Shadow Kill Swordsmanship. It was a swordsmanship of the middle class of spiritual level. However, with its ghostly body movement, it might be comparable to a swordsmanship of the upper class of spiritual level. Now Yiguchen had the highest level of swordsmanship, except for the swordsmanship he had learned in his previous life, the Boundless Heaven Sword Art, which was a sword technique of the highest class of spiritual level. It could be said that any swordsmanship of the spiritual level was extremely rare. Even the super-aristocratic families would regard it as a core martial art inheritance and would not teach it to non-core disciples. Sure enough, the shadow swordsmanship is derived from the shadow kill swordsmanship. The shadow kill swordsmanship is not only a swordsmanship, but also a body movement called shadow step. Moreover, when practiced to a high level, one can create a doppelganger. It could be said that the shadow kill swordsmanship was absolutely an excellent swordsmanship for assassination. If Yiguchin mastered it, it would not be difficult for him to kill a grandmaster in the chi refining realm with one move. After that, Yiguchin completely memorized the shadow kill swordsmanship. With the shadow swordsmanship, Yiguchin believed that he would be able to practice it faster than the boundless heaven sword art. After obtaining the shadow kill swordsmanship, Yiguchin left this level. After going through level after level of tests, Yiguchin's strength was steadily improving, especially the shadow kill swordsmanship. Because of the foundation, Yiguchin was able to practice it very quickly and had already reached the beginner level. For a swordsmanship of the spiritual level, it was extremely fast to reach the beginner level so quickly. On the 6th level of the 18 blood prison. After arriving here, Yiguchin looked around and found some figures. In the first few levels, Yiguchin had passed through alone. However, after looking around, Yiguchin found that there were very few assassins who could reach this level. Including red-haired Ghost and Nightingale, there were only a dozen people. It should be known that there were 50 assassins who had entered the 18 blood prison this time. This was only the 6th level, and more than half of them had already been eliminated. Moreover, Yiguchin knew that each level of the 18 blood prison was more difficult than the previous. The higher the level, the more difficult it would be. This was also the reason why only the bloodthirsty Tower Master had passed through the 18 blood prison. At this level, the entire space presented a desolate and bleak land. Yiguchin was surprised to find that he could not use his profound chi. He looked sideways and found that red-haired Ghost and the others did not have the slightest fluctuation of genuine chi. Is this level limiting one's strength? Yiguchin thought to himself. If that was the case, then what they competed with was their martial arts attainments and physical strength. Roar! Suddenly, a beast roar came from not far away, and a pitch-black demon wolf rushed over. Next, a blue-eyed cloud beast also rushed over. Three-eyed demon snake, purple lightning condor, a large number of demonic beasts surrounded Yiguchin and the other assassins, although they were all rank 1 and rank 2 demonic beasts. Normally, with their cultivation, it would be easy to deal with these demonic beasts, but now they could not use their genuine chi and profound chi, so their strength was naturally greatly reduced. Roar! A demonic cloud python rushed at Yiguchin. It was a rank 2 demonic beast. Under normal circumstances, Yiguchin could have easily killed him. But now, he could still do it. Chapter 35. Boom! Yiguchin ignited his chi and blood, and his body was covered with a layer of blood-red flame. Although he could not use his genuine chi and profound chi here, he could still use his physical strength and chi and blood. It could be said that Yiguchin's strength was comparable to the chi refining realm, not because of his cultivation realm, but because of his swordsmanship and physical strength. With the double refinement of the muscle-bone strengthening scripture and 9 Tribulations Heart Sutra, Yiguchin could rival a chi refining grandmaster with just his strong physical strength and superb swordsmanship without using his profound chi. He held the flying guillotine in his hand and poured his vigorous chi and blood into it. The flying guillotine's blade emitted a sharp blood-red glow. Yiguchin swung his sword at the fiendish python with cloud stripe. The fiendish python's head was split into 2 halves. Blood, flesh, and organs splattered all over the sky. After limiting the use of his profound chi, Yiguchin's strength did not decrease much. On the other hand, the rest of the assassins were greatly affected. Even Nightingale was forced to retreat by a few demonic beasts. Only the red-haired Ghost caught Yiguchin's attention. The red-haired Ghost moved like a ghost, shuttling through the demonic beasts. His blood-red sickle was like the Grim Reaper reaping lives. Yiguchin was no stranger to this ghostly movement. It was the shadow step of the shadow kill swordsmanship. It seems that the red-haired Ghost also obtained the opportunity of the shadow kill swordsmanship. Yiguchin was not surprised. With the red-haired Ghost's strength, it was not difficult for him to obtain the shadow kill swordsmanship. More than 10 assassins, including Yiguchin, were besieged by the demonic beasts. Some of the assassins had no strength to stay here, so they had to retreat. After all, compared to the opportunity, their lives were more important. As time passed, the smell of blood became thicker and thicker. It seemed to fill the sky and pile up into blood clouds. Although these attacking monstrous beasts were only rank 1 and rank 2 monstrous beasts, they could not be killed. If it were any other martial artist, they would have a feeling that there was no end to this. However, fatigue had already crept into his heart. Even Yiguchin, who was brimming with chi and blood and had a strong physique, felt a little weak at this moment. Now, only Yiguchin, the red-haired ghost, and Nightingale were left on the 6th floor. Yiguchin and the red-haired ghost could still hold on, but Nightingale was drenched in sweat. Her situation was slightly worse. Whoosh! An arrow of blood suddenly shot towards Nightingale. It was the poisonous breath of a poisonous insect. Under the mask, Nightingale's expression changed dramatically. That sneak attack was difficult for her to avoid. Bang! A blood-colored sword ray shot out like a bolt of lightning, dispersing the poisonous breath. Nightingale abruptly turned her head and saw Yiguchin calmly withdrawing his flying guillotine. Leave. These 3 simple words made Nightingale grit her teeth. At the beginning, when the Broken Sword Elder had wanted to take Yiguchin as his disciple, Nightingale had been very jealous. But now she knew that there really were monstrous sword geniuses in this world. Yiguchin was one of them. Suppressing the unwillingness in her heart, Nightingale glanced at the red-haired ghost, gritted her teeth, and left. Instantly, only Yiguchin and the red-haired ghost were left on the 6th floor of the 18-blood prison. As expected of the 18-blood prison. It's only the 6th floor, and only the red-haired ghost and I are left of the 50 Iron Mask assassins. Yiguchin was slightly out of breath. His body was already covered in blood. The blood-red mask contrasted with the blood, accentuating Yiguchin's demeanor as the demon of the sword. Roar! Suddenly, a deafening roar of a beast could be heard. A pitch-black beast broke through the crowd of beasts and charged toward Yiguchin and the red-haired ghost. That demonic beast was covered in pitch-black fur. Its 4 limbs were thick and there were no eyes on its head, only an incomparably huge mouth. This beast is... Yiguchin frowned. Although he knew many beasts, he did not know much about the beast in front of him. Boom! Before Yiguchin could react, the red-haired ghost directly attacked the beast. The blood-red scythe in his hand carried an astonishing killing intent as it charged towards the beast. Why is the red-haired ghost doing this? Yiguchin frowned. This was not the red-haired ghost's style of doing things. However, the beast was not something an ordinary rank 1 or rank 2 beast could compare to. Yiguchin estimated that it was comparable to a rank 3 beast. One must know that the golden-eyed horned dragon python guarding the dragon blood transformation fruit was a rank 3 beast. It was an existence that even chi refinement grandmasters did not dare to face head-on, not to mention that they could not even use their chi. However, the red-haired ghost's strength was clearly stronger than an ordinary chi refinement grandmaster. When he used the shadow step, his figure was like a ghost. Although the beast was strong, it was difficult for it to catch the agile red-haired ghost. As for the red-haired ghost's blood-red scythe, although it could only leave a shallow wound on the beast's body, it was gradually being depleted. There must be a reason why the red-haired ghost attacked the beast. Yiguchin thought to himself. He moved his feet and also charged towards the beast. Seeing Yiguchin also charging towards him, the red-haired ghost's cold eyes narrowed slightly under the mask. However, he did not attack Yiguchin. The 2 of them attacked the beast at the same time. Roar! Faced with the pincer attack of the 2, the wounds on the beast's body gradually increased. This undoubtedly stimulated the beast's ferocity. Roar! An earth-shattering roar suddenly came from the beast's mouth. The beast opened its mouth wide like a black hole. All the spirit chi in the surroundings was swallowed into the beast's mouth. What kind of technique is this? Yiguchin's eyes were filled with shock. If we let this heaven-devouring beast continue, we will all fail. Suddenly, the red-haired ghost's hoarse voice sounded. Heaven-devouring beast? Before Yiguchin could answer his doubts, the red-haired ghost took the initiative to attack. Blood-red echo. The red-haired ghost swung his blood-red scythe and spun it in the air. A terrifying blood-red wind suddenly spread out and swept towards the heaven-devouring beast. Boom! The blood-red wind cut into the heaven-devouring beast's body like a blade. The beast felt a wave of pain and let out a violent roar. Then, a black pillar of light with an aura of destruction suddenly shot out from the heaven-devouring beast's mouth. The ripples made the corners of Yiguchin's eyes twitch. He felt extreme danger. Even a peak chi refining stage grandmaster would not be able to withstand this attack. The expression in the red-haired ghost's eyes also changed. He gritted his teeth and summoned a defensive spiritual weapon. It formed a jet-black light shield in front of him that gave off a sturdy feeling like black iron. A supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon. Yiguchin was astonished. A supreme-grade spiritual weapon was not a common item to begin with. As for a defensive spiritual weapon, it was even rarer than ordinary spiritual weapons. This made Yiguchin even more wary of the red-haired ghost. As the 13th place on the Sheng Yuan Heaven's Pride list, the red-haired ghost must have a lot of trump cards up his sleeve. Just this supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon alone would likely be able to withstand the attacks of ordinary chi refining stage grandmasters. Chapter 36. The black beam of light from the heaven-devouring beast's mouth landed on the shield of light in front of the red-haired ghost. Several cracks appeared on the supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon in an instant, and under the continuous bombardment of the black beam of light, the cracks widened. The red-haired ghost took advantage of this opportunity to use the shadow step. He flashed out and used another move to attack the heaven-devouring beast. Yiguchin instinctively sensed that there must be an extraordinary opportunity on the heaven-devouring beast. Otherwise, the red-haired ghost would not have lost a rare supreme-grade defensive spiritual weapon in order to kill the heaven-devouring beast. Kill! How could Yiguchin fall behind the red-haired ghost? He moved his feet and used the shadow step as well. His figure instantly turned blurry, and after half a breath's time, it dissipated like a mist. It turned out to be an afterimage. The red-haired ghost caught this scene, and his pupils contracted under the mask. He had also obtained the shadow kill swordplay, and naturally recognized that Yiguchin was using the shadow step, a movement technique hidden in the shadow kill swordplay. The red-haired ghost was not surprised that Yiguchin could obtain the shadow kill swordplay, but he was surprised that Yiguchin was using the shadow step with such proficiency that even he was not as good as Yiguchin. The shadow step was paired with the shadow kill swordplay. From this, it could be inferred that Yiguchin's control of the shadow kill swordplay must have reached a certain level. How is it possible? How long has it been since Sword Demon obtained the shadow kill swordplay? How can he control it to such an extent? Even with the shadow sword technique as a foundation, it's impossible. The red-haired ghost gritted his teeth. He could not believe that Yiguchin had such talent in swordsmanship. The red-haired ghost also moved, holding the blood-colored scythe in one hand and the flying guillotine in the other. As he attacked the heaven-devouring beast, the flying guillotine suddenly turned its blade and a black sword shadow attacked Yiguchin. You finally can't hold back anymore. Yiguchin had expected this. In the 18-blood prison, there was no rule that forbade one from attacking other assassins, but there had to be a limit. At the very least, one could not casually kill others. Of course, if he died in the 18-blood prisons, he could only blame it on his bad luck. The red-haired ghost attacking Yiguchin made Yiguchin even more certain that the heaven-devouring beast had a great opportunity. Yiguchin wielded the flying guillotine and similarly swung his sword. A sword shadow whistled out and collided with the red-haired ghost's sword move. Afterwards, the two of them took action against the heaven-swallowing beast riddled with scars, while exchanging blows from time to time, releasing sneak attacks. It had to be said that the red-haired ghost was indeed strong as the 12th-ranked genius on the St. Yuan Heaven Pride list. Most importantly, this place had a suppressive effect on his true chi, preventing him from displaying his full strength. As for Yiguchen, he could rely on his powerful body and sword techniques to contend with the red-haired ghost. Roar! The heaven-devouring beast once again let out an unwilling roar. Its body was riddled with scars and it finally collapsed to the ground with a loud thud. The red-haired ghost's eyes suddenly turned sharp. He hurled his blood-colored scythe. The sharp scythe spun in the air and slashed along the heaven-devouring beast's head, leaving a trail of blood-colored mist in its wake. Then, a pitch-black monster core appeared in its head. Yiguchen narrowed his eyes, sensing the extraordinariness of the monster core. The red-haired ghost was the first to take action. His figure flashed as he headed straight for the pitch-black monster core. It seems that the opportunity lies in the monster core. Yiguchen also used the shadow steps, his speed not much slower than the red-haired ghost's. The red-haired ghost's hoarse voice suddenly sounded, "Sword Demon, I admit that you do have some strength, but you are not qualified to compete with me for the monster core." "Is that so?" Yiguchen's expression did not change. Holding the flying guillotine, he clearly had no intention of backing down. There was no one in the past, present, or future who could make the sword demon back down. "You have received the blood-colored mask from the Tower Master. Although I can't kill you, I can still teach you a lesson." The red-haired ghost brandished his blood-colored scythe. Although he did not inject any vital energy into it, the terrifying wind still tore through the air. It turned into a blood-red arc and slashed towards Yiguchen. Just this fierce gust of wind was enough to kill an Essence Origin stage expert. However, Yiguchen was not afraid. His vital energy and blood surged, forming the shape of a dragon and elephant. He stabbed out with his sword. The sword struck out like thunder, and the void seemed to explode with a thunderous boom. Boom! The two collided and both retreated. The red-haired ghost's eyes contained a hint of seriousness. Although he already knew that Yiguchen's physical body was extraordinary, the direct observation made him feel that Yiguchen was a threat. The red-haired ghost attacked again. He raised his blood-colored scythe vertically high and then slashed it down. The harsh sound of the explosion was even about to tear people's eardrums. Great split! As the scythe slashed down, the surrounding void exploded. The strong wind pressure pressed the ground to crack. Yiguchen's eyes flickered. He no longer held back and wielded his sword. Wisps of sword light intertwined to form a mysterious trajectory. What was more terrifying was that the sword light did not disperse. Instead, they intertwined and formed a terrifying sword net. Boundless Heaven Sword Art. This superior spiritual level swordsmanship was even more difficult than the shadow-killing swordsmanship. Even with Yiguchen's talent, he had only reached the peak of the competent level and was only one step away from the basic level. However, Yiguchen was not in a hurry even though he had been stuck at this step for a long time. At present, he could exert 50% of the power of the boundless heaven sword art. 50% of the power of the superior spiritual level swordsmanship was already very terrifying. However, when the blood-colored scythe crashed into the dense sword net, it was like a fish caught in a net and could not break free. What kind of swordsmanship is this? There was a flash of surprise in the red-haired ghost's eyes. This unfamiliar swordsmanship gave him an extremely dangerous feeling. Moreover, this fluctuation could only be possessed by a spiritual level swordsmanship. 2. Spiritual level swordsmanship. Even in some aristocratic families with a good foundation, it was difficult to see a spiritual level swordsmanship. However, Yiguchen actually possessed 2 spiritual level swordsmanship. Moreover, the red-haired ghost was certain that this spiritual level swordsmanship was not weaker than the shadow-killing swordsmanship. Sword Demon actually has such an opportunity. The red-haired ghost sighed in his heart. Boom! The blood-colored scythe could not break the trajectory of the boundless heaven sword art. However, Yiguchen changed from defense to offense. The dense sword net suddenly spread out. Countless sharp sword rays surrounded the red-haired ghost like a net and attacked him. The red-haired ghost hurriedly took out the best defensive spiritual weapon. However, this jet-black light shield had been damaged by the heaven-swallowing beast's attack and was now covered with spiderweb-like cracks. In the face of the attack of the boundless heaven sword art, this defensive spiritual weapon, which was already seriously damaged, directly collapsed and turned into specks of light. Yiguchin took the opportunity to use the willow catkin wind movement technique. His figure moved and swept over the heaven-swallowing beast's head, directly putting the demon pearl into his origin ring. The red-haired ghost saw this and the corners of his eyes twitched. He tightly grasped the blood-colored scythe but did not attack again. "Do you still want to snatch it?" Yiguchin said indifferently. "I didn't expect that the opportunity of the 6th level would be obtained by you. However, it doesn't matter. There are opportunities on every level of the 18 blood prisons. The further you go, the more precious the opportunities are. If you want the opportunity of the 6th level, then take it. However, the opportunities later, humph." The red-haired ghost coldly glanced at Yiguchin. He knew that there was nothing he could do to Yiguchin in this place where he could not use his chi. However, even if he could use his chi, the red-haired ghost figured that although he could suppress Yiguchin, with Yiguchin's abnormally strong physique and 2 spirit-level sword arts, it would still be difficult for him to defeat or even kill Yiguchin. Seeing that the red-haired ghost had tactfully retreated, Yiguchin did not continue to pester him. After shaking off some demon beasts, he was not in a hurry to enter the next level. Instead, he began to ponder over the demon pearl. On the demon pearl, there were densely packed tiny characters engraved like ants. "This is a secret technique?" Yiguchin was a little surprised. Chapter 37. In this world, in addition to martial arts cultivation skills, there were also secret skills. Secret skills had many uses and were not limited to offensive and defensive means. For example, Yiguchin's heart-concentrating spell was also a secret skill. However, it was just a common secret skill that could only calm one's mind. However, some secret skills had earth-shattering power, such as various offensive, amplifying, and defensive secret skills. Some very rare secret skills, if mastered, could be comparable to the gifted skills of a 7th-grade genius. This showed how rare and precious some secret skills were. However, such secret skills were usually extremely rare and were far more precious than martial arts cultivation skills of the same level. Therefore, when Yiguchin learned that the opportunity in the sky-devouring beast's demonic core was a secret skill, he was overjoyed. After some investigation, Yiguchin was a little shocked. This secret skill was indeed extraordinary. It was called the sky-devouring secret skill. As the name implied, the sky-devouring secret skill could devour the surrounding spiritual chi of heaven and earth in a short period of time and forcibly improve one's cultivation realm. If one cultivated it to a high level, the range of devouring would also be expanded and the amplifying effect would be stronger. Of course, there was a price to pay to use this secret skill. In addition to being extremely weak after using it, there was also a requirement on one's physical body. If one's physical body was ordinary, it would not be able to withstand such a huge intake of spiritual chi of heaven and earth. Not only would it not improve one's cultivation realm, but it would also risk exploding and dying. However, Yiguchin's strength was his physical body. This sky-devouring secret skill seemed to be tailor-made for Yiguchin. My physical body has reached the profound realm of the muscle-bone strengthening scripture and I have passed the second blood test of the physical body. It is enough for me to use the sky-devouring secret skill without any scruples. Yiguchin's eyes were filled with excitement. The biggest gap between him and those God-favored geniuses was their cultivation realm. If he mastered the sky-devouring secret skill, it would undoubtedly make up for this gap temporarily. For the next difficult bloody mission, Yiguchin, who had mastered the sky-devouring secret skill, would have a greater chance of success. Without any hesitation, Yiguchin found a secluded place and began to cultivate the soul-devouring secret skill. In order to cultivate the soul-devouring secret technique, the first step was to refine the demonic core and refine the strand of devouring power that belonged to the heaven-devouring beast. using this strand of devouring power to draw in the surrounding spiritual qi and circulate it in the body through a special method. It was called soul devouring. Boom! Yi Guqian placed the heaven-devouring beast's Yao core in his palm. Immediately, his qi and blood surged out like a fire lotus, enveloping the Yao core and refining it. As time passed, the heaven-devouring beast's core gradually turned into a viscous black liquid. Disperse! Yi Guqian bellowed. The black liquid splashed out, and a black light suddenly appeared within it. It seemed to have a mind of its own as it tried to escape into the void. How could Yi Guqian let it leave? He immediately wrapped the qi and blood around it and swallowed it. In an instant, Yi Guqian's body shook. He felt a terrifying devouring power erupt in his body, absorbing Yi Guqian's qi and blood. Fortunately, Yi Guqian's qi and blood were robust. He hurriedly activated his qi and blood fire. His entire body was like a man of fire. He was like a pill furnace, refining this strand of devouring power. While Yi Guqian was gradually refining this strand of devouring power, Yi Guqian's mind was greatly shaken. The scene in front of him changed. It was no longer the space of the 18-blood prison, but a desolate land. The land was crimson and bleak. There was no life within 10,000 miles. The spiritual qi of the entire world was extremely scarce, and not a single blade of grass could grow. And on this land that seemed like it had come from ancient times, an incomparably huge strange beast was entrenched between the heavens and the earth. This strange beast was like a heaven-devouring beast that had been magnified countless times. However, its savage and primordial aura was far more powerful than that of a heaven-devouring beast. The so-called heaven-devouring beast was as tiny as an ant in front of this strange beast. This strange beast is... Yi Guqian frowned. Roar! Suddenly, the strange beast roared, its roar shaking the 9 heavens. Its head only had a huge bloody mouth, like a black hole. A whirlpool of chaotic black mist circulated within it. The strange beast roared at the sky. The endless spiritual qi in the 9 heavens seemed to be drawn in by this strange beast's huge mouth. Tao Tai! Yi Guqian exclaimed. Such a primordial exotic beast made Yi Guqian feel small and insignificant in front of it. He suddenly realized that the heaven-devouring beast might have a trace of the ancient Taotia's bloodline, which was why it could possess the soul-devouring secret technique. After all, the Tao Tai was the most representative primordial fierce beast that could control the devouring power. In the face of the shocking scene of the Tao Tai swallowing the sky, Yi Guqian did not panic too much. He knew that perhaps it was because he had refined the devouring power and accidentally inherited some of the memories hidden in the depths of the bloodline energy. But just as Yi Guqian was thinking, the scene in front of him suddenly changed drastically. The Tao Tai that had dominated the primordial chaos was lying in a pool of blood. A blurry figure was standing on top of the Taotia's body that looked like a primordial demon mountain. Who is it? He can actually kill Tao Tai. Just as Yi Guqian was feeling suspicious, the blurry figure suddenly muttered to himself. Killed the Tao Tai, used its bones, blood, and heart to forge the sword body, and the devouring core as the core of power to create an ancient famous sword and pass on the heaven-devouring secret technique. What? Yi Guqian's breathing stopped for a moment. Create an ancient famous sword and pass on the heaven-devouring secret technique? The primordial famous sword records were divided into the heaven and earth lists. The heaven list famous swords were born from heaven and earth and could not be forged by humans. However, the 72 famous swords on the earth list were all forged by humans. Those who nurtured the primordial famous swords were either peerless great emperors of the sword principle or divine craftsmen who surpassed the 9-star craftsmen. Moreover, it was different from the fixed ranking of the heaven ranking. If a powerful famous sword appeared in the future, it would replace some of the famous swords that were ranked at the bottom of the earth ranking. Therefore, the earth-ranking famous swords that had been passed down since ancient times would only become stronger and stronger. And that blurry figure actually wanted to use the primordial fierce beast Tao Tai as a casting material to forge a peerless famous sword that could enter the earth list. This already represented the identity of that person. A divine craftsman. Just as Yiguchin was sighing in his heart, everything in front of him was washed away like waves of water. Yiguchin's mind returned and the scene in front of him returned to the 6th floor of the blood prison. I just don't know if that person used the Tao Tai to forge an ancient famous sword. Yiguchin shook his head slightly. However, there was one thing that he was concerned about. The sky-devouring secret technique that the figure had mentioned. Sky-devouring secret technique. Spirit-devouring secret technique, the difference of one word was like the difference between heaven and earth. It seems that my spirit-devouring secret technique should be a weakened version of the sky-devouring secret technique. According to that person, he might have passed down the so-called sky-devouring secret technique in his famous swords. Yiguchin pondered but immediately shook his head. It was not enough to draw a conclusion based on some half-real images. Moreover, if primordial famous swords were so easy to find, they would not be called primordial famous swords. Not to mention Yiguchin, even some of the peerless experts ranked at the peak of the 9 regions would not be able to obtain a primordial famous sword without absolute strength and luck. It should be known that the primordial famous swords that existed in the 9 regions were the 9 heaven list famous swords that hung above the firmament of the 9 regions. They replaced the blazing sun and bright moon to illuminate the earth. Well, now is not the time to think about these illusory things. Let's break through the 8 hells first. Yiguchin thought and once again set off for the next floor. Chapter 38. Outside the 18 blood prison, the demon judge and netherworld judge Yuli stood in the darkness. Although they did not enter the 18 blood prison, they knew the situation inside. As expected of the person chosen by the House Lord. Yiguchin not only obtained the Shadow Kill Sword technique, but also the spirit-devouring secret technique from the red-haired ghost. Yuli praised. Now, the red-haired ghost and Yiguchin have both passed the 7th level. The 8th level is a watershed in the 18 blood prison. From this level onwards, it will not only test one's cultivation, but also one's mind, will, soul and so on. Every level after this is like a natural moat, the demon judge said in a low voice. Although there were many risks in the previous trials, there was still a certain gap between them and the 18 blood prison that was rumored to be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. This was because the first few trials were the most basic tests, and the true difficulty only began after the 8th trial. However, although the later levels are very difficult, the opportunities are far from what the previous levels can compare to, Yuli said. That depends on whether they have the strength or not, the demon judge said coldly. 8th level of the 18 blood prison. After cultivating the spirit-devouring secret technique, Yiguchin directly arrived at this level. Whether he could pass or not, he would be directly sent out afterwards. Because they could only enter the first 8 levels of the 18 blood prison this time. As soon as he entered the 8th level, Yiguchin suddenly felt that this place was unusual. This was an underground cave. A dark river meandered through it like a waterfall. In the middle of the cave, there was a figure sitting cross-legged. This figure was covered in dust and did not have the slightest trace of vitality. Although the body was withered like a dried walnut, it did not rot. The body was difficult to rot. This was one of the signs of breaking through the life and death threshold and crossing the heaven and earth spirit bridge. On the finger of this corpse, there was an ancient origin ring. However, the reason why Yiguchin thought the 8th level of the 18 blood prison was unusual was not because of the scene in front of him and the mysterious corpse. It was because Yiguchin had seen this scene and this corpse before. The scene here was the same as the Sword King's secret realm of the North River Sword King Chu Donglu. And the corpse sitting cross-legged was the North River Sword King, Chu Donglu. Yiguchin suddenly felt a sharp pain in his back. The tip of a blood-stained sword pierced through his chest. He turned around, and what he saw was Xia Yubing's beautiful face that was dyed in blood. Yiguchin, I bet you never imagined that you, the leader of the 7 chosen of the Milky Way Prefecture, the young sword grandmaster, would have such a day. Xia Yubing, a trace of surprise flashed through Yiguchin's eyes, but there was no anger on his face. Instead, he calmly shook his head. Is this the 8th level of the 18 blood prison? I've already begun to touch upon the soul realm, Yiguchin muttered. Everything in front of him was clearly an illusion. However, this illusion revealed the deepest resentment and regret in people's hearts. Not to mention whether the challenger could see through it. Even if they could and knew that it was just an illusion, how many people could remain calm in the face of the deep-rooted resentment in their lives? Unfortunately, this Yiguchin was not the Yiguchin of the past. Although he had occupied Yiguchin's body and inherited all of Yiguchin's memories, Dugu Wubai still had his own memories and soul. Therefore, he was not afraid of the soul realm targeted at Yiguchin, and would not fall into it. Ha, I didn't expect that there would be a 7th grade heaven's pride in this small Saint Origin dynasty, and with such a strong talent. Suddenly, a slightly lazy and disdainful laugh came from not far away. Upon hearing this voice, even the indifferent Yiguchin slowly furrowed his brows and looked towards the source of the voice. It was an extremely handsome young man. He wore a Big Dipper robe and a Mizar star crown on his head. His expression was indifferent and calm, and he carried an innate confidence. This confidence came from his talent, strength, and background. One of the Big Dipper 7, Mizar star, Gu Xiaoyang. A heaven's pride with talent, strength, and influence. Like Yiguchin, Gu Xiaoyang was also a 7th grade heaven's pride with powerful talent. It could be said that Gu Xiaoyang was definitely Yiguchin's greatest enemy. He was even more difficult to deal with than Xia Yubing, who had obtained the North River Sword King's inheritance. Now, in this illusion, Yiguchin was confronting Gu Xiaoyang again. Are you Gu Xiaoyang? Yiguchin's expression returned to normal. After all, he had the sword demon's soul, so he could still treat Gu Xiaoyang indifferently. You are also a 7th grade heaven's pride, and I am very interested in the innate sword embryo in your body. If I can obtain your sword embryo, my strength will rise again, far surpassing the other 6. Gu Xiaoyang smiled as if it was a matter of course. Boom! A powerful profound chi exploded in Yiguchin's body. It was Xia Yubing's sneak attack. Yiguchin spat out a mouthful of blood and flew forward. Secret art of wedding dress. Gu Xiaoyang muttered. As his hands moved, a terrifying amount of true chi burst out and directly pulled Yiguchin's body over. Then, he stretched out his hand and pierced into Yiguchin's dantian in his abdomen. Although it was just an illusion, the pain was incomparably real. However, compared to the pain of his abdomen being pierced, the pain of his innate ability being stripped away was the most unbearable. No wonder Yiguchin hated Gu Xiaoyang to the bone. Buzz! A shocking sword sound came from Yiguchin's abdomen. It was a sword embryo about the size of a palm. It was sparkling and translucent. It didn't look like a sword embryo, but more like a piece of spiritual jade. This was Yiguchin's foundation as a 7th grade heaven's pride, his innate ability, the innate sword embryo. Clang! As if sensing that its master was about to leave, the innate sword embryo struggled desperately as if it had a mind of its own. Then, with a clang, it turned into a 3-foot-long flying sword. As soon as the innate sword embryo appeared, even Gu Xiaoyang's true chi was cut in half by the sword chi. As expected of an innate ability. Gu Xiaoyang sighed. At the same time, his eyes suddenly changed, as if there were 2 miniature stars hidden in them. At the same time, a crack suddenly appeared in the middle of Gu Xiaoyang's forehead. Then, an eye appeared. A 3rd eye. This eye was dark blue like the starry sky. At the same time, it shone with specks of crystal light, looking deep and mysterious. This was Gu Xiaoyang's innate ability as a 7th grade heaven's pride, the eye of the stars. Starry sky divine light. Gu Xiaoyang's true chi gathered between his eyebrows. A deep beam of light containing extremely terrifying energy shot out and bombarded the innate sword embryo. The sword chi of the innate sword embryo blocked the power of the starry sky divine light. However, its master, Yiguchin, was seriously injured. Naturally, the innate sword embryo's power was not at its peak. Give it to me. Gu Xiaoyang used the power shifter's secret skill again, trying to control and refine the innate sword embryo. Although it's just an illusion, you can forget about taking away the innate sword embryo again. Yi Guqin's eyes shone brightly. At the same time, the golden light on his body was like water waves. Yi Guqin used his Vajra body to the extreme. His wounds stopped bleeding instantly. Boundless Heaven Sword Art. Without the slightest hesitation, Yi Guqin directly used his strongest sword move. Starry Sword Art. Gu Xiaoyang also used his sword. Although the two didn't meet face to face, they were already fighting in the illusion. Chapter 39. Clang. Dazzling sparks erupted as the swords collided. Yi Guqin's boundless heaven sword art was impenetrable, like an inescapable net that enveloped Gu Xiaoyang. What Gu Xiaoyang used was the star sword art, a unique sword technique of Star Universe Sword Pavilion. The sword light was as bright as the Milky Way, but it carried a fatal killing intent. Although this was only an illusion of the 8th level of the 18-blood prison, it was extremely real. Even the sparks that erupted when the swords collided were flawless. An ordinary person might really be immersed in the illusion and be unable to extricate himself. However, Yi Guqin faced it with a cold attitude. Let me experience the power of the innate sword embryo first. Yi Guqin waved one hand. The innate sword embryo seemed to have a mind of its own and turned into a streak of flowing light, flying to Yi Guqin. Sooner or later, I will really take you back. Now, let me experience your power first, Yi Guqin muttered to himself. The gifted magic of a 7th-class genius was not to be underestimated. As a sword genius, Yi Guqin's gifted magic of the innate sword embryo was naturally not to be underestimated. Yi Guqin moved his palms and the innate sword embryo erupted with dazzling spiritual light. An extremely sharp sword light tore through the sky and earth and pierced towards Gu Xiaoyang. Starry Sky Barrier. The stellar eye between Gu Xiaoyang's eyebrows flashed again. As the starlight surged, it formed an impenetrable barrier in front of him. Boom! The innate sword ray fell on the starry sky barrier and erupted with violent fluctuations. The white light and the starlight reflected each other. Although it looked magnificent, it contained terrifying power. Break! As soon as Yi Guqin finished speaking, the innate sword embryo erupted with buzzing and trembling sounds again. It randomly transformed into countless innate sword rays, each of which was extremely sharp and seemed to be able to pierce through the sky. Is this the power of the gifted magic? Yi Guqin sighed. This was only a phantom image in the illusion, yet it was able to manifest such power. It was no wonder that Gu Xiaoyang coveted the real innate sword embryo so much. Boom! 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 Countless explosions seemed to resound at the same time. Gu Xiaoyang's starry sky barrier exploded into a sky full of stars. Regardless of whether it's Xia Yubing or Gu Xiaoyang, both of them are merely small pebbles on my path to the peak of the sword Dao. It's impossible for such an illusory test to trap me. Yi Guqin waved his hand, and the scene before him instantly dissipated like quicksand. The entire Sword King mystic realm, Xia Yubing, Gu Xiaoyang, the innate sword embryo, everything was annihilated in an instant. The scene in front of him changed. Yi Guqin suddenly discovered that he was inside an array formation. The reason why he came to this conclusion was because there were layers upon layers of array formation patterns beneath Yi Guqin's feet. These array formation patterns were dark red like blood, and looked rather bloody and strange. Outside the array formation, there were 12 blood-red flying swords inserted into the grooves on the ground. Every flying sword was mottled with the color of blood, as if they had been soaked in blood for a long time. These 12 blood-red flying swords all carried a thick bloody and baleful aura. Just as Yi Guqin's thoughts were solemn, the blood-red array formation on the ground suddenly began to operate. In an instant, the blood-red light filled the sky. The 12 blood-red flying swords seemed to be pulled by something. They buzzed and trembled, and rose from the ground. They turned into 12 blood-red lights, and intertwined with each other as they charged towards Yi Guqin. Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows. He held the flying guillotine in his hand, and used the willow catkin wind movement technique. His figure instantly became faintly discernible. As for the 12 flying swords, they intertwined into blood-red light beams, and charged towards Yi Guchen. Clang! 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 Although Yi Guchen's willow catkin wind movement technique was very nimble, the 12 blood-red flying swords relied on the array formation to operate. They were flexible and strange, and at the same time, powerful. Although Yi Guchen dodged a few of the swords, he still had to use the flying guillotine to break them. When the swords touched, Yi Guchen only felt an unparalleled force vibrate, and it shook Yi Guchen's arm until it was numb. At the same time, an extremely violent blood-red force was transmitted into Yi Guchen's arm through the swords. This force? Yi Guchen's expression changed slightly. He could feel that this force was extremely violent, like a rampaging beast. Even the profound qi in his body could only retreat in front of this blood-red force. If this violent force was allowed to wreak havoc in his body, Yi Guchen would not be able to withstand it, and his life might even be in danger. This was because Yi Guchen's body was so strong that he could withstand it for a short period of time. If it were an ordinary cultivator in the qi refining realm, he would be severely injured within a few breaths. This sword formation is really difficult to deal with. Yi Guchen's body was covered in a faint golden light, which was the manifestation of activating the Vajra celestial body. At the same time, Yi Guchen still had to resist and dodge the attacks of the blood-red flying swords. What should I do? As time went by, Yi Guchen's injuries gradually worsened, and his tendons and meridians were somewhat twisted. However, even in such an extreme situation, Yi Guchen's expression was still calm. Got it. Yi Guchen's black eyes suddenly lit up. As his profound qi circulated, it activated the devouring power that was left in his dantian. This devouring power came from the monster elixir of the heaven-devouring beast, and it was the foundation of the soul-devouring secret skill. Although Yi Guchen did not know whether the devouring power could deal with this violent blood-red force, he had no other choice. With the activation of his profound qi, the devouring power also circulated quietly, spreading throughout Yi Guchen's body, and immediately collided with the blood-red force. Yi Guchen heaved a sigh of relief. In the face of the devouring power, no matter how violent the blood-red force was, it was completely devoured and refined. It was obvious that the devouring power was still able to suppress the blood-red force. However, the degree of danger of this blood-red force also made Yi Guchen very fearful. He relied on his strong body and the devouring power to resist this blood-red force. If it were an ordinary qi refining realm grandmaster, if he did not have any special means, he would be in a very miserable state, and even be in danger of dying. However, although Yi Guchen had found a way to resist the blood-red force, he could not get out of the sword formation for the time being. How should I get out of here, or? Yi Guchen was thinking, and at the same time, many sword wounds appeared on his body. After all, Yi Guchen's cultivation was only at level 8 of the essence origin, and he was still somewhat powerless when he was trapped in such a dangerous sword formation. However, his body had passed the second minor tribulation of the blood tribulation of the physical body, so he had a strong recovery ability. Although he could not fully recover, he could still heal and stop the bleeding temporarily. Although his injuries were getting worse and his body was getting tired, Yi Guchen did not panic at all. His eyes followed the tracks of the 12 blood-red flying swords, and at the same time, they corresponded with the blood-red formation on the ground. Yi Guchen was not proficient in formations, but as long as it was about swords, as long as he had the soul of the sword devil, he would not be unfamiliar with it. This sword formation is very ferocious. The swords are fierce and sharp, but they have hidden tracks. As long as it is a formation, it must have a core. Once the core is refined, the sword formation will be broken. If one understood one method, all methods would be understood. Yi Guchen, who had an innate advantage in sword principle, also had an advantage when facing the sword formation. After 102 more moves, the point where the 12 flying swords converge will be the flaw. Finally, Yi Guchen's starry eyes, which were like the night sky, suddenly lit up. His body was covered in wounds and he was completely exhausted. Clang! When the 12 flying swords attacked Yiguchin at the same time, Yiguchin's profound chi surged. At the same time, some white light patterns suddenly spread out on his body. These white light patterns, like the veins of a human body, gradually formed on the surface of Yiguchin's body. Counting them carefully, there were a total of 36 white light patterns. Universal Sword Codex, Sword Range. Chapter 40. The Universal Sword Mantra was a sword cultivation method passed down to Yiguchin by his father. Previously, Yiguchin had practiced the first part of the mantra and cultivated 108 sword veins. Unfortunately, it was destroyed by Gu Xiaoyang. Later on, after receiving the 100 veins blood ginseng from Xuansu, Yiguchin cultivated 36 sword veins again. However, he was still far from 360 sword veins. Even so, the power of the sword veins could not be underestimated. Although it was not an offensive method, it was like a secret technique that could greatly increase the power of Yiguchin's sword chi. Vacuum sword wave, overlapping waves. Yiguchin used vacuum sword wave. 20 transparent sword waves rippled in the void. At the same time, the sword veins on Yiguchin's body gave off a dazzling light. Almost in an instant, the power of Yiguchin's overlapping waves increased again. The waves were like the rolling waves of the sea. The powerful sword wave swept out in all directions. Even the ground covered with formation diagrams faintly cracked. Boom! The vacuum sword wave that had been amplified by the sword veins accurately struck the weak point where the flying swords converged. It could be said that if the timing had been a second earlier, a second later, or if the position had been slightly off, the weak point would have disappeared in an instant. However, Yiguchin, with his keen sense of the path of the sword, struck the weak point perfectly. Rumble. With a loud rumble, the 12 blood-red flying swords burst out in an instant. As if they had lost control, they flew around randomly. The ground also rapidly cracked and shattered. A blood-red formation plate suddenly appeared in Yiguchin's sight. The blood-red formation plate was about the size of a palm. Its surface was engraved with extremely complicated formation inscriptions. After Yiguchin cracked the sword formation, the 12 blood-red flying swords turned into 12 streams of light and escaped into the formation plate. Just as the sword formation was destroyed, the demon magistrate and nether magistrate exchanged glances. A sliver of surprise flashed through their eyes. The little Ashura sword formation was actually broken. Yuli's tone still carried a trace of surprise. The so-called little Ashura sword formation might only be a small problem for experts like them. However, it was quite a threat to chi refinement stage and even divine soul stage experts. This Yiguchin is indeed worthy of being called the young sword grandmaster. He has an extraordinary understanding of the way of the sword. Even the little Ashura sword formation was broken by him. The demon judge also had an indescribable look of surprise. That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that if we can break the little Ashura sword formation, we'll have the right to face the 17th level of the 18 blood prison. Both the demon judge and Yuli felt a lingering fear when they thought of that level. They were considered to be extremely strong, but they didn't even have the courage to face the checkpoint on the 17th floor. Only the house master can pass that level with ease. Now, the only ones who have the right to enter the 17th floor and obtain the opportunity, there are only 2 people. The demon judge's tone carried a trace of inexplicable meaning. One is Yiguchin, and the other is Yu Shicho, Yuli said. Ha, this is interesting. I'm really looking forward to the day when Yiguchin and Yu Shicho face each other, the demon judge whispered. On the 8th floor, the surroundings returned to a dead silence. The ground cracked and shattered, and Yiguchin's body was covered in sword wounds, dripping with blood. This level was extremely dangerous. If Yiguchin hadn't cultivated his physical body, if he hadn't obtained the secret skill of spirit devouring, the outcome might have been completely different. However, there were no ifs, so Yiguchin had passed through this level without any mishap. The power of Sword Vein had indeed exceeded Yiguchin's expectations. At that moment, he had only recovered 36 sword veins. If he were to recover all 108 sword veins, how much more powerful would his sword moves be? If he were to go one level higher, he would be able to cultivate the first volume of Universal Sword Principle to the phenomenal level, cultivate 360 sword veins, and form a Dejoutian cycle. How powerful would it be? Yiguchin was looking forward to it. As for the second volume of Universal Sword Principle, one could only cultivate it after the first volume was completed. However, at that moment, Yiguchin's attention was still on the formation board in his hand. The crimson formation board was filled with a ruthless aura, with a strong smell of blood. In the formation board, there were 12 mini flying swords. If the formation board was activated, it would turn into 12 crimson flying swords. As for the power of the sword formation, Yiguchin had already experienced it for himself. This sword formation is where the opportunity of the 8th floor lies, Yiguchin muttered. Yiguchin was not proficient in formation, but he knew a little about it. The classification of formation was not as complicated as that of martial arts. There were 3 levels, heaven, earth, and human. Each level was divided into high, middle, and low grades. A human-level formation was enough to pose a threat to Qi Refining Realm and Divine Soul Realm experts. An Earth-level formation was extremely rare, and a Heaven-level formation mostly existed in legends. Although Yiguchin was not interested in formation, the sword formation had given Yiguchin a new understanding of sword principle. Sword formation is also a form of swordsmanship. It is beneficial for understanding the essence of swordsmanship. Moreover, I was not proficient in sword formation in my previous life. Now that I have such an opportunity, I should not let it go. Yiguchin's eyes lit up. He wanted to refine the sword formation. In order to refine and control the sword formation, the first thing to do was to refine the formation board. Yiguchin began to refine the formation board. His qi and blood surged out. At the same time, he used his blood essence as a primer to establish a connection with the formation board. Not long after, Yiguchin faintly felt that when he activated the formation board, there were 12 weak responses in the depths of his consciousness. They were the 12 blood-red flying swords. After refining the formation board, Yiguchin learned the name of the sword formation. Little Ashura Sword Formation. At the same time, Yiguchin finally understood what the extremely difficult and violent blood-red power was. It was the power of Ashura. Could this little Ashura sword formation be related to the Ashura sword intent? Yiguchin could not help but think in this direction. However, there was not much Ashura power in the little Ashura sword formation, and it was not very pure. Even so, it was already a huge threat to Yiguchin. One could imagine how much Yiguchin's strength would soar if he could comprehend the true Ashura sword intent. I can feel that this little Ashura sword formation is only a prototype. Although its power is not bad, there are still many imperfections. It can only be ranked as a low-grade mortal sword formation. Even so, with the Ashura power hidden in the flying swords, it is enough to threaten a Qi Refining Realm warrior. Even a Divine Soul Realm warrior could fall for it if he is not careful. Yiguchin evaluated the power of the little Ashura sword formation. He always had a feeling that after this little Ashura sword formation, there would be an even more terrifying existence. However, there was no need to think so much at the moment. Even if it was just the little Ashura sword formation, Yiguchin would have a hard time controlling it. A true sword formation required at least a Divine Soul Realm warrior to control the flying swords with the power of the soul. Only then could its power be maximized. However, Yiguchin was only a profound origin realm warrior. He had not even cultivated his genuine qi. If he used his profound origin to control the blood-red flying swords, their power would be reduced. Moreover, he would not be able to control them as freely as he could with the power of the soul. Before, when the little Ashura sword formation operated on its own, it was extremely powerful. When Yiguchin tried it, he could only temporarily control 3 or 4 flying swords. Moreover, their flight was extremely unstable. This was also because Yiguchin had a deep understanding of the way of the sword. Therefore, he could control 3 or 4 flying swords in such a short period of time. I need to slowly familiarize myself with the way of the sword formation. Let's leave this place first. Yiguchin pondered and prepared to leave. Even though he had passed the 8th floor, he could only leave. If he wanted a chance to enter, he had to fill up the flying guillotine. The next time I enter the 18 prisons of blood, my goal will be the Azura sword intent. Yiguchin looked into the depths of the darkness. Vaguely, there seemed to be an extremely terrifying sword intent brewing in the depths of the 18 prisons of blood. That sword intent seemed to have the tragic aura of a Azura that could tear apart everything in the world. Chapter 41. Sword Intent. It was a power that only 1 in 10,000 sword geniuses could grasp. Different sword intents brought about different power bonuses. Although Yiguchin did not know what kind of sword intent Xia Yubing possessed, he was confident that the Azura sword intent was not inferior to Xia Yubing's sword intent. If I have a flexible sword, I can comprehend the hard and soft sword intent again, Yiguchin thought. However, he did not have any ideas about this. After this, Yiguchin directly left the 18 blood prisons. It could be said that Yiguchin had gained a lot from this trip to the 18 blood prisons. Not only did he reach the 8th level of the Essence Realm, but he also obtained a Spirit-grade sword technique, the Shadow Assassination sword technique, as well as the Spirit-devouring secret technique and the Little Ashura sword formation. Previously, Yiguchin had only used the most basic Shadow sword technique when he acted as the Blood Listening Tower's sword demon. This was because Yiguchin did not want to expose his true identity. But now, with the Shadow Assassination sword technique, the Spirit-devouring secret technique, and the Little Ashura sword formation, the sword demon he had transformed into had a lot more tricks up his sleeves. After ending the 18 blood prisons, Yiguchin and the other assassins also received a few days of rest. After this period of rest, they would listen to the demon judge's orders and officially participate in the blood mission. In these few days, Yiguchin also adjusted himself to his peak state and discussed forging techniques with Chu Shiqing from time to time. Yiguchin was also very interested in forging swords. After all, many of the famed swords on the ancient sword records Earth ranking were forged by divine blacksmiths. It was just like the illusory scene that Yiguchin saw when refining the heaven-devouring beast's core. The blurry figure used the primordial vicious beast Taotai as a material to forge a terrifying demonic sword that could devour the heavens and earth. Yiguchin also wanted to forge a sword that completely belonged to him. However, during this time, the old drunkard appeared before Yiguchin again. The first thing he said was that he wanted Yiguchin to treat him to a drink. In a private room of a restaurant, the old drunkard drank until his cheeks were bright red. He was a little drunk. Yiguchin only took 2 sips. After 3 rounds of drinking, the old drunkard suddenly took out a sword and placed it on the table before continuing to drink. Jia Chen. Yiguchin's eyes lit up. To a swordsman, the sword was his partner. However, at this moment, Yiguchin could not recognize the Calamity Dust sword. Although the Calamity Dust sword was still simple and natural at this moment, it didn't seem old anymore. The body of the sword was like a cold spring, and the lightning markings reflected a cold light. The biggest difference between Jia Chen and the previous one was that there were 2 extremely complicated patterns on the sword. Previously, these lines were extremely blurry, as if they had experienced extreme wear and tear. But now, the 2 complicated lines were extremely clear, and they were almost perfectly connected with the lines on the sword. Spirit runes. Yiguchin's eyes lit up. The 2 complicated lines were undoubtedly spirit runes. Moreover, they were spirit runes that had been restored to a complete state after being repaired. The current Jia Chen could truly be called a spirit rune divine weapon. Yiguchin turned to look at the old drunkard. He was still drinking by himself, as if the Calamity Dust sword had nothing to do with him. Previously, Yiguchin had guessed that the old drunkard must be somewhat extraordinary, but the old drunkard's ability was still beyond his expectations. This old man who loved to drink was at least a 4-star forging master. However, even a 4-star forging master would find it very difficult to repair the Calamity Dust sword in such a short period of time. Therefore, Yiguchin guessed that this old drunkard should be at least a 5-star forging master. The higher the star rank, the higher the status of the forging master. One must know that Chu Shiqing's father, the great pavilion master of the Heavenly Forging Pavilion, was only a 3-star forging master. He was still a threshold away from becoming a 4-star forging master. However, even with such a level, he was still an extremely famous existence in the Saint Origin dynasty. If the old drunkard's identity as a 5-star forging master was exposed, the royal family of the Saint Origin dynasty would probably treat him as a Buddha and worship him in the palace. With the old drunkard's character, as long as he was willing, not to mention the entire South Sky region, at least in the Saint Origin dynasty, all forces would respect him and not dare to offend him. However, even with such an identity, the old drunkard still drowned his sorrows in alcohol all day long. This made Yiguchin somewhat puzzled. However, everyone had their secrets. Before becoming close friends with the old drunkard, Yiguchin would not rashly inquire about his secrets. This would only make things unpleasant. Senior, I may go on a long journey in the future. These crystal jades are for Senior to buy wine. Yiguchin waved his hand and an origin ring fell in front of the old drunkard. There were a total of 1,000 crystal jades in it. Previously, Chu Shiqing had given Yiguchin 10,000 crystal jades, so Yiguchin did not lack crystal jades for the time being. However, the value of the old drunkard's repair was far from what 1,000 crystal jades could measure. This was just a small token of appreciation from Yiguchin. At least you have some conscience. The old drunkard took the origin ring and continued to drink. By the way, I wonder if Senior knows the method of forging a flexible sword? Yiguchin hesitated for a moment and asked. Although he knew that he was asking for too much, Yiguchin had no other choice. A flexible sword with divine spiritual inscriptions was really difficult to obtain. Even Chu Shiqing's father, the great pavilion master, probably did not have a 30% chance of success. And there was only one piece of golden heavenly silkworm steel. Therefore, the only person that Yiguchin could think of was the old drunkard in front of him. Boy, do you really think I'm a blacksmith? The old drunkard blew his beard and glared fiercely at Yiguchin. I don't mean that. I just urgently need a flexible sword with divine spiritual inscriptions. I have no other choice but to brace myself and ask Senior. Yiguchin's tone was neither servile nor overbearing. There was no hint of flattery in it. Forging a flexible sword is different from forging a hard sword. Not only are the materials needed more, but they are also rarer. The value of forging a flexible sword is enough to forge 5 hard swords of the same level. The old drunkard snorted coldly. I have something that may be the core material for forging a flexible sword. Yiguchin took out the golden heavenly silkworm steel. This is golden heavenly silkworm steel. Seeing such a precious material, the old drunkard was obviously a little surprised. He did not expect that Yiguchin actually had such a rare material. Yes, the golden heavenly silkworm steel is of good quality. Its toughness is indeed excellent. It is a good material for forging a flexible sword, but it is not enough. The old drunkard shook his head. What other materials do you need? Yiguchin asked. I don't intend to help you forge. It doesn't matter if I tell you the materials. The old drunkard said coldly, and told him some of the materials needed for forging a flexible sword. After that, Yiguchin frowned slightly. Although he knew that forging a flexible sword would require a lot of rare materials, the requirements were still beyond his expectations. Yiguchin could barely find most of the materials, but there were 3 things that were not easy to get. Chapter 42. These 3 things were the mysterious silver heavy water, the rare fire of heaven and earth, and the spiritual seal. Among them, the mysterious silver heavy water was an extremely rare casting material. Its texture was as viscous as mercury. Adding a little mysterious silver heavy water to any spiritual weapon could make it as solid as a whole. Not only that, its most peculiar characteristic was that it could change between hardness and softness. It could be as hard as diamond in an instant, or it could be turned into liquid metal. As a material for making a soft sword, it was very suitable. The rare fire of heaven and earth was some strange fire that existed between heaven and earth. It could be used to make ordinary spiritual chi, but if one wanted to make a weapon above the spiritual inscription weapon, the rare fire of heaven and earth was indispensable. Some 4-star forging masters almost all had their own rare fire of heaven and earth. According to Yiguchen's guess, the old drunkard should also have a rare fire of heaven and earth. But obviously, the old drunkard did not have a deep friendship with him, so he could not use the rare fire of heaven and earth for him. Even the old drunkard did not agree to help him make a sword. So, Yiguchen could only find the rare fire of heaven and earth by himself. As for the last spiritual seal, it was the carrier of the spiritual inscription. The reason why the spiritual inscription weapon was called spiritual inscription weapon was that, in addition to the power of the materials, the most important thing was that it had spiritual inscriptions. Different spiritual inscriptions could bring different power to the spiritual inscription weapon. For example, the broken edge spiritual inscription on the tribulation dust could make the sword chi have the effect of breaking edge after it was activated. It had a great penetrating effect on any genuine chi protection and defensive spiritual weapon. The thunderstorm spiritual inscription could make the tribulation dust burst out with the power of thunder and lightning, which was more powerful. It could be said that a high-grade spiritual seal brought about an incomparably huge bonus effect. Since Yiguchen wanted to make a soft sword of the spiritual inscription weapon level, he had to do everything to the best of his ability. Naturally, he could not choose the spiritual inscriptions that were common on the streets. However, those rare spiritual inscriptions were extremely rare and not easy to find. Even if they appeared, they were expensive and even priceless. It seems that it is not easy to make a soft sword. Yiguchen sighed slightly, but he was not discouraged. Senior, thank you for telling me. Yiguchen cupped his hands slightly to the old drunkard and left. A few days later, the demon judge passed down an order through the blood order. The Crimson Mission had officially begun, and the first thing the participating assassins had to do was enter the Beichen Manor and lay low, waiting for the magistrate's next orders. Beichen Manor? Yiguchen raised his eyes slightly. Apart from the St. Yuan mansion, where the royal family resided, the other 9 mansions of the St. Yuan dynasty were occupied by various forces. In the Beichen mansion, other than the mansion master's faction, there were only 2 other major factions. The 2 super families were the Murong family and the Situ family. Could it be that the target this time is to make a move against the super aristocratic families? Yiguchen thought to himself. The foundation of the super families was even more profound than the 5 big families of the Sky River Prefecture. Within their families, there was more than one life and death chamber warrior. However, this wasn't something Yiguchen needed to worry about right now. After packing up, he set off for Beichen Mansion. The Beichen Mansion was about the same size as the Sky River Prefecture. After a few days of hurrying, Yiguchen arrived at a bustling city within the Beichen Mansion, Anbei City. The reason why Yiguchen didn't choose a secluded city to lay low was because he wanted to search for information regarding the mysterious silver heavy water, the heavenly flame, and the spiritual seal. The Beichen Mansion was vast, and its resources weren't any weaker than the Sky River Prefecture. Therefore, Yiguchen wanted to try his luck. In every big city, there was no lack of people selling information. Soon, after paying the price of dozens of crystal jades, Yiguchen received some information. Recently, there were 3 major events happening in the Beichen Mansion. The first was the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction. In the St. Yuan dynasty, there were several major neutral forces that didn't participate in the competition between forces. Heavenly Forging Pavilion was one of them, and Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce was another. The Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce had a strong foundation, and it was rumored that it had the shadow of the St. Yuan dynasty's imperial family behind it. Therefore, it developed like a fish in water in the St. Yuan dynasty. With the strength and foundation of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce, the auctions they held were naturally not small affairs. In the past auctions, there was no lack of extremely rare martial arts, secret techniques, precious treasures, and so on. Therefore, the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction attracted a lot of attention. The second event was that the sword-seeking stele was about to open again. The sword-seeking stele was a place of opportunity in the Beichen mansion. Yiguchen was quite interested in the sword-seeking stele, and he inquired about it a lot. It was rumored that the sword-seeking stele was left behind by a mysterious sword Dao expert. Every year, at a specific time, it would erupt with a majestic sword qi. The sword cultivators who participated in the trial would have to withstand the sword qi as they approached the sword-seeking stele. There were a total of 5 places around the sword-seeking stele. If one could obtain a place, they would have the qualification to leave their name on the sword-seeking stele. However, for many years, there were only a few people who could leave their name on the sword-seeking stele. Those sword cultivators who were able to obtain a place were able to obtain different opportunities. It was rumored that there was once a sword cultivator who obtained a king-level sword art from the sword-seeking stele. Although it was only a lower king-level sword art, it ignited the sword-seeking stele's passion. Many experts coveted the sword-seeking stele. There were even many warriors who were not sword cultivators who participated. This was because even if they obtained a sword art, they could sell it to others if they did not use it themselves. Not to mention, there were many other opportunities. Attracted by such an opportunity, some divine soul realm experts and even life and death hidden lattice experts came to participate. However, the higher the realm of the warriors, the stronger the sword pressure from the sword-seeking stele. After a round of screening, those experts were not as successful as ordinary warriors. Therefore, in recent years, the sword-seeking stele had gradually become a competition ground for many geniuses. After all, to be able to leave one's name on the sword-seeking stele was a supreme honor for any sword cultivator. The sword-seeking stele, huh? I can take a look. Yiguchen's interest in the sword-seeking stele was growing. As for the third major event, it was the marriage between Murong Ditian of the Murong family and Situ Hongxue of the Situ family. Murong Ditian was not an ordinary person. He was a heaven's pride of the Murong family, the #1 heaven's pride of the Beichen mansion. He was ranked 5th on the St. Yuan heaven's pride list and a grade 6 heaven's pride. Murong Ming, who Yiguchen had met previously, was Murong Ditian's younger brother. He was only 20 years old, but his cultivation had already reached the 7th layer of the qi refining stage. He had also mastered many of the Murong family's sword arts. He could be said to be a famous heaven's pride in the St. Yuan dynasty. In addition to his tall and handsome appearance, he could be said to be the dream lover of many girls. As for Situ Hongxue, she was also a heaven's pride of the Situ family and ranked 7th on the St. Yuan heaven's pride list. However, compared to her strength, her appearance was more famous. Not only in the Beichen mansion, but even in the entire St. Yuan dynasty, Situ Hongxue's beauty could be ranked in the top 5. With such a family background, identity, strength, and appearance, Situ Hongxue was also the ideal partner in the hearts of countless men. The marriage between the two was like a golden boy and a jade girl. In the entire Beichen mansion, there was no small amount of discussion. As for the wedding banquet, it was set to be held half a month later. It seems like the Beichen mansion will not be peaceful during this period of time. Yiguchen faintly sensed that a storm was about to come. However, he was not worried. What he needed to do now was to participate in the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction and see if he could obtain the materials needed to forge a flexible sword. Chapter 43. The Divine Capital was one of the core cities of the Beichen Mansion. It was also the location of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction. In the core area of the Divine Capital, there was a majestic 9-story pavilion. This was the auction house of the Divine Capital's Divine Saint Chamber of Commerce. The Divine Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction was in one day. At this moment, the auction house was abnormally lively. Many cultivators had already entered early to occupy good seats. Of course, the most important seats had already been reserved by many big shots. Even if you had crystal jades, without any background, you could only sit at the back. I didn't expect to spend 400 crystal jades just to sit in this seat. Yiguchen, who was wearing a bamboo hat, sat in a seat slightly closer to the center of the auction stage. And this seat still required another 400 crystal jades. Although Yiguchen had more than 10,000 crystal jades, he couldn't afford such a consumption. I only hope to find what I want. Yiguchen closed his eyes and rested, waiting for the auction to arrive. A day passed in the blink of an eye. The next day, the entire Divine Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction house was like a bomb that had been ignited. Not only were there experts from the Beichen mansion, but there were also people from the neighboring mansions. Yiguchen did not pay any attention to this. Suddenly, Yiguchen sensed a familiar figure with his mind. It was a young girl in a yellow dress. She had bright eyes and white teeth. Her figure was elegant, like a lotus flower that had just emerged from the water. It's her. Yiguchen raised his eyebrows. The young girl in the yellow dress was Situling, the girl who had fought for the dragon blood transformation fruit in the Cloud Valley mountain range. The aura surging from Situling's body had also reached the Qi refining realm. Because of the Situ family's status, Situling was only led to the core of the auction house by one of the Divine Saint Chamber of Commerce's people. "Oh, isn't this Miss Ling, er?" A somewhat frivolous voice sounded. The corners of Yiguchen's mouth curled into a smile. He had met a familiar face again. A handsome young man in white nodded at Situling with a faint smile on his face. It was Murong Ming. They are the geniuses of the Situ and Murong families. Murong Ditian and Situ Hongxua didn't come. How could they have the time? They're probably preparing for the wedding. No, I heard that they are recuperating and preparing to challenge the sword-seeking steel. Whispers sounded in the surroundings. Facing Murong Ming's warm smile, Situ Ling's face was cold. She snorted and turned around. "Miss Ling, there is no need for you to regard me as an outsider. Not long from now, our two families will be as close as one family. Furthermore, what does Miss Ling think of me? If you don't mind, you and Miss Hong Shui can marry me and my elder brother." Murong Ming smiled very happily. Lecture. Big sister Hong Shui has never liked Murong Ditian. And you, aren't you thinking too highly of yourself? How many young ladies have been toyed with by you? Situ Ling shouted, her brows tightly knitted. Obviously, she loathed Murong Ming. "Oh, is that so? But can you stop the marriage between our two families?" Murong Ming's smile faded and he sat on the other side. Facing the quarrel between the two, the surrounding people were as quiet as cicadas in winter. No one dared to say anything. At this moment, Yiguchen's expression suddenly changed. His gaze turned to the entrance of the auction. Because he felt the aura of a sword cultivator. A green-clothed young man with a jade-like face walked in casually. His figure was tall and straight like a pine tree. There was a long sword hanging on his waist. His hands were behind his back. However, there was a faint aura that attracted people's attention. That is, the outstanding talent of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, Chu Qingqi. In the crowd, a small number of people recognized the green-clothed young man and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. Sword Sect Pagoda Forest? Yiguchen's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. The Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was not unfamiliar to many martial cultivators in the Saint Origin dynasty. In the Saint Origin dynasty, the forces on the surface were divided into 3 big sects and 4 big institutions. The 10 Prefectures Elite Gathering was a grand event held for the 7 big sects to select outstanding disciples. The Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was one of the 4 big institutions. It was known as the sacred ground for sword cultivators. The reason why Yiguchen knew a little about the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was because he had once obtained the title of Young Sword Master in the Saint Origin dynasty. The title of sword sect seemed to be somewhat related to the sword sect pagoda forest. Chu Qingqi, I didn't expect you to be here too. Could it be that you're here for the sword seek steel? All of a sudden, a coarse and arrogant voice resounded like thunder. It was a red-clothed young man with the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear. He carried a heavy 9-orifice golden saber on his back and emitted a domineering aura. It's the disciples of the saber-conferred monarch palace. They're here too. The saber-conferred monarch palace? Yi Guchen was surprised. The saber-conferred monarch palace was also one of the 4 big institutions. If the sword sect pagoda forest was the sacred ground for sword cultivators, then the saber-conferred monarch palace was the heaven for saber cultivators. Moreover, the battle between saber and sword had been going on since ancient times. Therefore, the 2 institutions constantly had friction with each other. Usually, when the students of the 2 institutions met, it was inevitable for them to fight. Zhao Fengyang, you've entered the saber-conferred monarch palace for less than a year, but you've already entered the heavenly saber list. Chu Qingqi smiled faintly. The same goes for you. Aren't you also an outstanding talent in the sword sect pagoda forest? You must have come to the Beichen mansion to leave your name on the sword seek steel, right? Zhao Fengyang sneered. We're in the auction house of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce. Do you want to fight? Although the disciples of the Heavenly Saber list can't wait to trample the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest under their feet, now isn't the time. Chu Qingqi shook his head indifferently in the face of Zhao Fengyang's tit-for-tat. There's no hurry. I'll have plenty of chances to defeat you. If I defeat you, I'm sure my ranking on the Heavenly Saber list will rise. Zhao Fengyang snorted coldly. I didn't expect this place to be so lively. A hearty laugh suddenly rang out. As this voice rang out, even Yi Guchen, who was hiding in the dark, frowned slightly. This was because he had sensed an extremely powerful sword qi. It was a young man in a black and white robe with the image of the sun and moon embroidered on his chest. He carried a long sword on his back and stood tall like an unsheathed sword. That image is the Limitless Sword Sect. This time, the surrounding people exclaimed. It was even more shocking than the appearance of Chu Qingqi and Zhao Fengyang. This was because the young man in front of them was from the Limitless Sword Sect, which was the strongest and had the strongest foundation among the 3 major sections. Although the 7 major forces of the Saint Origin dynasty kept each other in check, there was still a faint difference between them. Although this difference wasn't very big. The Limitless Sword Sect was one of the top forces among the 7 major forces. Chapter 44. So it's senior brother Lu Tianying. Seeing that the people from the Limitless Sword Sect had appeared, that Murong Ming suddenly spoke in a cordial manner. Oh, you know my name. You're a disciple of the Murong family? Asked the youth named Lu Tianying. I'm Murong Ming. Murong Ditian is my elder brother, Murong Ming said. Oh, so you're Murong Ditian's younger brother. Lu Tianying's expression softened. What's going on? Some people were puzzled. Don't you know? Although the 10 prefectures elite gathering hasn't been held yet, I heard that Murong Ditian has already been selected as a disciple of the Limitless Sword Sect. With the Limitless Sword Sect and the marriage alliance with the Sita clan, the Murong family has become rich. Senior brother Lu Tianying, if you don't mind, please come and sit with me, said Murong Ming. Although the Murong family was a first-rate super family in the Beichen mansion, they were still insignificant when compared to the Limitless Sword Sect. Ah! Lu Tianying waved his sleeve and didn't stand on ceremony. When they passed by Chu Qingqi, Lu Tianying noticed Chu Qingqi's faintly furrowed brows, as well as the faint trace of loathing hidden in his eyes. If the Sword Sect's Tower Forest and the Sealed Saber Royal Palace were at loggerheads, then the Limitless Sword Sect and the Limitless Sword Sect were like fire and water. Are you qualified to leave your name on the sword-seeking steel this time? Lu Tianying muttered in a low voice. Chu Qingqi faintly smiled and shook his head. Xian Hao might be qualified, but you, then let's wait and see. Lu Tianying waved his sleeve. The surrounding cultivators were as quiet as cicadas in winter when they saw the two of them with a strong smell of gunpowder. Yi Guqin was pondering in the dark. He knew that the Sword Sect's Tower Forest and the Limitless Sword Sect seemed to have an unresolvable enmity. As time passed, almost all the people who came to participate in the auction had arrived. A woman in a tight red dress with a charming mature charm walked up to the auction stage while twisting her slender waist. I'm sure everyone is impatient from waiting. Fei Ji will not waste any more words and present the first auction item. Soon, the first item was presented. It was a long saber, a supreme-grade spiritual weapon. Not everyone could own a magic weapon with spiritual inscriptions, so the best spiritual weapon naturally became a hot commodity. Soon, this supreme-grade spirit weapon attracted many bids. However, regardless of whether it was Murong Ming, Situ Ling, Lu Tianying, Chu Qingqi, Zhao Fengyang, or the others, they all wore indifferent expressions. Clearly, with their status, supreme-grade spiritual artifacts were not very attractive to them. The next item to be auctioned is a Xiantian swordsmanship called the Heavenly Eagle Swordsmanship. It was created by an expert who had broken through the hidden latch of life and death and stepped onto the spiritual bridge of heaven and earth. Although it's only a low-level Xiantian swordsmanship, once it's used, it's as powerful as a falcon swooping down on a rabbit. Xiantian sword techniques were not common. Even the 5 aristocratic families of the Milky Way province would treat Xiantian sword techniques as their core martial arts. I bid 2,000 crystal jades. You want to buy an innate sword technique with only 2,000 crystal jades? Why don't you go rob a bank? I'll pay you 4,000 crystal jades. Although it was only a low-level Xiantian swordsmanship, the Heavenly Eagle swordsmanship still attracted a lot of competition. Only the young talents of the major forces looked on coldly. A trace of disdain flashed in Lu Tianying's eyes. Obviously, this swordsmanship was only common in the Limitless Sword Sect. In the end, the Heavenly Shadow swordsmanship was obtained by the leader of a small force. He could take it back and use it as his core martial arts. Following that, the atmosphere of the auction was still very lively. However, Yi Guqin just sat there indifferently. He did not have much capital, so he would not compete for things that he did not particularly need. As for the people from the other major powers, they also did not speak much. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item to be auctioned is a treasure herb. Fei Ji clapped her jade-like hands and a pretty maid came in carrying a tray. She lifted the cloth and a fiery red fruit that resembled a dragon fruit appeared in front of everyone's eyes. This is the asparagus fruit. Someone whispered in surprise. Yes, it's the asparagus fruit. As everyone knows, the asparagus fruit is a treasure herb that strengthens muscles and bones and replenishes vital energy and blood. If taken in the body refining realm, it can lay a strong physical foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, please consider carefully for your juniors. Fei Ji covered her mouth and smiled. The starting price of the asparagus fruit was 2,000 crystal jades, which made many people frown. Although the asparagus fruit was a treasure herb that could replenish vital energy and blood, it did not have much effect on these Qi refining realm and divine soul realm experts. Although the physical body was important, after entering the Qi refining realm, one could use true Qi to cleanse the body. Although it could not be compared to a martial cultivator who focused on refining the body, it was not much worse. As for the use of their own juniors, many forces had some similar spiritual herbs. Although the effect might not be as good as the asparagus fruit, it was enough. Therefore, the asparagus fruit with a starting price of 2,000 crystal jades was not popular. On the auction stage, Fei Ji saw this and seemed to have expected it. Although the asparagus fruit was rarer than the spiritual herbs, its effect was somewhat useless. Naturally, the enthusiasm of the auction was greatly reduced. However, although the asparagus fruit was not useful to most people, Yi Guqin's eyes lit up slightly. The asparagus fruit had the effect of replenishing vital energy and strengthening muscles and bones. Naturally, it also had the effect of repairing tendons and veins. After receiving the 100 veins blood ginseng from Xuansu, his sword vein had been restored to 36 sword veins. If he could get the asparagus fruit, Yiguchen was confident that the recovery speed of his sword vein would greatly increase. If he could repair his sword vein as soon as possible and cultivate the first volume of the Universal Sword Codex to the advanced level, Yiguchen would be qualified to cultivate the second volume of the Universal Sword Codex. That was a real king-level cultivation method. 2,200 crystal jades. Yiguchen lowered his voice and said casually. Seeing that someone had bid, the crowd shifted their gaze. Yiguchen was wearing a bamboo hat and a black robe, sitting on the side. He was very inconspicuous. 2,400 crystal jades. Someone bid. Although the asparagus fruit's effect was somewhat useless to most people, there were indeed some people who wanted to give it to outstanding juniors. In response, Yiguchen just smiled and continued to bid. In the end, Yiguchen won the asparagus fruit at the price of 3,400 crystal jades. The people from the other major forces, including Murong Ming and Situ Ling, did not bid. This was because there was no lack of asparagus fruit among these forces that could temper one's vital energy. Is everyone feeling a little bored? I'm sure the vast majority of you will be interested in the next treasure, Fei Ji giggled. Accompanied by Fei Ji's laughter, another treasure was brought to the auction stage. That is. Many people shifted their gazes. Under the bamboo hat, Yiguchen's eyes also flashed with a glimmer of light. Chapter 45. Mysterious silver heavy water. Looking at the liquid that was as viscous as mercury in the container, Yiguchen's attention was focused on it. Without a doubt, this was one of the 3 rarest treasures that Yiguchen needed to forge the soft sword, the mysterious silver heavy water. Everyone, I believe you have heard of this mysterious silver heavy water. It is a rare material for forging spirit inscription divine weapons. It can transform between a solid and liquid state. If you add a few drops of mysterious silver heavy water into a spirit artifact, it can make the spirit artifact flawless. Fei Ji said with a smile. The mysterious silver heavy water was not like the asparagus fruit from before. It was useful to almost all martial cultivators. After all, who didn't want to have a handy and powerful weapon? Looking at the auction house that was once again in high spirits, Yiguchen's brows were somewhat solemn. Obviously, it would be much more difficult to obtain the mysterious silver heavy water than the asparagus fruit. The Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce was very smart. The mysterious silver heavy water was auctioned in drops, and the starting price of a drop was as high as 1,000 crystal jades. I bid 1,200. I bid 1,500. The price of the mysterious silver heavy water continued to rise. Suddenly, the white-haired old man stood up and said indifferently, I bid 2,500 crystal jades. Everyone, give this old man some face. It's Master Gu. Master Gu is a 3-star blacksmith. He is highly respected in the entire Beichen mansion. I heard that he is also a guest of the Heavenly Forging Pavilion. Seeing Master Gu make a bid, the surrounding voices instantly quieted down. Even Lu Tianying and the others did not speak. After all, offending a blacksmith was not a good thing. Just as Master Gu was about to buy a few drops of the mysterious silver heavy water, a lazy voice suddenly said, 50,000 crystal jades, I want all of the mysterious silver heavy water. This voice did not sound loud, and even had a trace of immaturity, but everyone, including Yiguchen, turned their gazes to the source of the voice. When he saw the figure, even Yiguchen was slightly stunned. It was just a little fatty who looked to be 16 or 17 years old. He was white and chubby, wearing a golden robe, and had a somewhat rich appearance. However, there was a sword hanging from his waist, which looked rather out of place with his figure. Which family does this brat come from? He's clearly a hothead. A few people sneered. They clearly felt that this little fatty didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Humph, I don't know which family you are from. Haven't you heard of this old man's name? Master Gu looked displeased. A half-grown brat also came to ruin his good thing. Who are you? Little Fatty dug his ears with his little finger, looking confused. You. Master Gu was so angry that his face turned into the color of a pig's liver. There was anger in his eyes. Can we bid now? Little Fatty directly ignored Master Gu and asked Fergie on the stage. Oh. Okay. Fei Ji was also stunned for a moment before she hurriedly nodded. Although the little fatty won the mysterious silver heavy water, the surrounding people looked at him with pity. With Master Gu's reputation as a 3-star blacksmith, there were many people who wanted to help him vent his anger. Yi Guchen frowned. He didn't expect that the little fatty would actually win all the mysterious silver heavy water. Now, it wouldn't be easy to find more mysterious silver heavy water. Yi Guchen wouldn't give up so easily. After the auction, it was obvious that this little fatty wouldn't be able to get away so easily. That would be Yi Guchen's opportunity. He wasn't a pedantic person. Sometimes, in order to obtain something, it was necessary to use some other means. Otherwise, Yi Guchen wouldn't have become an assassin of the bloodthirsty tower for the Shura sword intent. After the mysterious silver heavy water, some auction items were displayed one after another. Some caused fierce competition, while others were mediocre. Yi Guchen was lucky. He won some materials to forge a flexible sword. Although they weren't the 3 most difficult materials to find, they still saved Yi Guchen a lot of effort. Of course, on the other hand, Yi Guchen only had about 5,000 crystal jades left in his origin ring. After that, another auction item aroused great enthusiasm. Even Lu Tianying, Chu Qingqi, Zhao Fengyang, and the others started to bid. The auction item was a secret technique called the Qi Explosion Secret Technique. As the name implied, the Qi Explosion Secret Technique was a secret technique that targeted Qi. When using this secret technique, one could compress their Qi to the extreme at will, and then explode with several times the power. What was even more terrifying was that the compressed Qi from the Qi Explosion Secret Technique could be attached to various spiritual weapons. Regardless of whether it was sword Qi or saber Qi, they could all explode with greater power. This was also why people like Lu Tianying were so interested in the Qi Explosion Secret Technique. However, this Qi Explosion Secret Technique wasn't very attractive to Yi Guchen. Firstly, he didn't have any crystal jades to compete for it. Secondly, this Qi Explosion Secret Technique seemed a little useless to Yi Guchen, who had the sword vein. However, Yi Guchen was weighing the price. If he took out the spirit-devouring secret technique to auction, he didn't know how much it would fetch. However, it would probably be far more valuable than the Qi Explosion Secret Technique, because the spirit-devouring secret technique could improve a warrior's realm in a short time. This kind of secret technique had always been rare and precious. However, Yi Guchen was just thinking about it. It was impossible for him to take out the spirit-devouring secret technique to auction. In the end, the Qi Explosion Secret Technique was won by Lu Tianying, who had a strong background. Murong Ming even sponsored Lu Tianying with a lot of crystal jades, so the relationship between them was much more harmonious. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item is the last auction item of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce's auction. It's a spirit-level martial skill. As Fei Ji's words fell, the entire auction house was in an uproar. Previously, a Xiantian sword technique had attracted a lot of competition. Now, there was a spirit-level martial skill, which would definitely cause everyone to go crazy. This was because, unlike treasures, elixirs, and so on, martial skills could be passed down. In particular, some big forces needed some powerful and rare martial skills as their core. Generally speaking, only the 7 major forces could possess spirit-level martial skills. Even for Yi Guchen, it was a coincidence that he possessed 2 spiritual-level sword principles. One was passed down to him by his father, and the other was obtained in the 18-blood prison. However, for ordinary warriors, it was already very rare to be able to practice Xiantian martial skills. As for spirit-level martial skills, unless one joined the 7 major forces, it was almost impossible to come into contact with them. Even if one joined the 7 major forces, it would probably take a lot of effort to learn spirit-level martial skills. This showed how rare spirit-level martial skills were. I wonder what kind of martial skill this is. Is it swordsmanship? Ye Guqin thought to himself. Ye Guqin was not in a hurry to learn swordsmanship. He had not practiced the 2 spirit-level sword techniques to perfection, so he was not in a hurry to obtain new swordsmanship. Ladies and gentlemen, Fei Ji wants to tell you that this is not only a spirit-level martial skill, but also an extremely rare defensive martial skill called the protection of heaven. As Fei Ji's words fell, the entire auction house seemed to be dead silent for a moment. In this dead silence, everyone seemed to be breathing heavily. Chapter 46. Not only was it a spiritual level martial art, but it was also a spiritual level defensive martial art. Under normal circumstances, defensive martial arts were less valuable than offensive martial arts, so the value of a defensive martial art was higher than an offensive martial art of the same level. Moreover, this was not an ordinary defensive martial art, but a spiritual level defensive martial art. Its value was a little shocking. Even among the 7 major forces, spiritual level defensive martial arts were rare. This is it. As long as I get this spiritual level defensive martial art, no one among the elites of the Limitless Sword sect will be a match for me, except for Xian Hao and a few others. Lu Tianying stared at the auction stage with burning eyes. The reason he had participated in this auction was because of the all-heaven protection. However, it was obvious that he was not the only one who wanted the protection of all heaven. Chu Qingqi of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest and Zhao Fengyang of the Saber Conferred King's Palace both stared at the scroll that recorded the protection of all heaven. It's actually a spiritual level defensive martial art. With my current physical body, the Vajra celestial body and the protection of all heaven, I'm afraid that even an ordinary Qi refinement stage grandmaster won't be able to cause any harm to me, Ye Guqin thought to himself. However, he knew that it was impossible for him to get the protection of all heaven with his financial resources. Even if he got it, it would cause endless trouble. Sure enough, after the protection of all heaven was auctioned, the first to stand up and bid was Lu Tianying. The starting price of the protection of all heaven was as high as 20,000 crystal jades, and the final price was obviously far more than that. 25,000 crystal jades. Everyone, I am Lu Tianying of the Limitless Sword sect. Please give me some face. Lu Tianying looked around and said. Perhaps his own strength was not considered to be at the top here, but the background of the Limitless Sword sect caused many people who wanted to speak to be at a loss for words. Even Fei Ji could only smile bitterly when she saw this scene. Although there seemed to be a hint of cheating, she could not say anything since the Limitless Sword sect had a background. 28,000 crystal jades. Almost as soon as Lu Tianying's voice fell, another voice sounded. It was Chu Qingqi of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Chu Qingqi, do you really want to go against me? Lu Tianying narrowed his eyes, a dangerous glint flickering in them. Isn't it the duty of the disciples of the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest to oppose the disciples of the Limitless Sword Sect? Chu Qingqi smiled faintly with a calm expression. Ha, your Sword Sect's talent has been suppressed by my Limitless Sword Sect all these years. Do you still have the courage to go against me? Lu Tianying sneered and bid again. Ha, I also want such a defensive martial art. Zhao Fengyang interjected. The fighting style of a saber cultivator had always been bold and unrestrained. Therefore, it was quite necessary for him to cultivate a defensive martial art. The following bids were basically a game between the 3 great forces. The price of the protector of all heaven continued to rise. In the end, it reached more than 50,000 crystal jades. Murong Ming, lend me all your crystal jades. In the future, I will guarantee that you will enter the Limitless Sword sect. Lu Tianying's eyes were bloodshot. It was obvious that he would not give up until he achieved his goal. Really? Thank you very much, senior brother Lu. Facing Lu Tianying's robbery, Murong Ming was happy instead of angry. He was born in a super family and did not cherish crystal jades. However, the quota to enter the Limitless Sword sect could not be bought with crystal jades. Moreover, his talent and strength were far inferior to his brother Murong Ditian. It was impossible for the Limitless Sword sect to take a fancy to him. Only by using this method would he have a chance to enter the Limitless Sword sect. 70,000 crystal jades. Lu Tianying's tone was extremely cold and his gaze was extremely sharp. Chu Qingqi and Zhao Fengyang both frowned. This price had already slightly exceeded their limit. Although Chu Qingqi did not want him to obtain the Protector of all Heaven, he really could not take out more crystal jades. 70,000 crystal jades going once, 70,000 crystal jades going twice. Just as the smile on Lu Tianying's face widened slightly and he was waiting for Fei Ji to finish her words, a voice that seemed to be asking for a beating sounded again, 100,000 crystal jades. This young master wants it. Once this was said, there was an uproar. Everyone looked over. Sure enough, it was that fat white boy again. Previously, he had used 50,000 crystal jades to bid for the mysterious silver heavy water, which had greatly angered Master Gu. Now, he actually opened his mouth to bid again. However, it was clear that the price that the little fatty quoted still shocked these people. Where are you from? Don't tell me you don't know about my Limitless Sword sect. The veins on Lu Tianying's forehead were faintly throbbing as he tried to suppress the anger in his tone. But from his cold gaze, it could be seen that he was really angry. Limitless Sword sect. What the hell is that place? The little fatty looked confused. No one knew if he was angry at Lu Tianying or if he really did not know about the Limitless Sword sect. Is this kid not from the Saint Origin dynasty? Otherwise, how could he not know about the Limitless Sword sect? Some people were dumbfounded. Good, good, very good. Lu Tianying said the word good 3 times in a row. Obviously, he was so angry that his internal organs were burning. With his identity, not to mention the outside world, even among the elite disciples of the huge Limitless Sword sect, he was considered to be in the upper echelon. When had he ever been ignored like this? The people around looked at the little fatty no longer with sympathy and pity, but as if they were looking at a dead person. After offending several big shots in a row, the little fatty, regardless of his identity, would probably end up in a miserable state. In the end, the auction of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce ended in such a dramatic situation. In the end, the real winner was not the people from the big forces, but the little fatty who looked somewhat lucky. Looking at the little fatty, for some reason, Ye Guqin faintly felt that something was wrong. This was because he felt an extremely strong sword essence from the little fatty. However, the state of this sword essence was very strange, as if it was deliberately sealed by someone. If it was an ordinary person, they might almost ignore it. However, it was difficult to hide from the perception of the sword demon who had been immersed in the sword principle for many years. But what made Ye Guqin puzzled was that he deliberately felt that the little fatty did not know any sword principle, nor was he a sword principle genius. This was inconceivable. Just as Ye Guqin was thinking, the whole auction also came to an end. However, almost everyone's eyes fell on the little fatty. In the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce, even Lu Tianying and the others could not directly make a move. After all, the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce seemed to have the shadow of the Saint Origin dynasty's imperial family behind it. Although the Limitless Sword sect was not particularly afraid of the imperial family, they still had to give them face. However, the little fatty, who was in the eye of the storm, seemed to be naive and ignorant of everything. He directly walked out of the door of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce without a care in the world. Just as the little fatty took a few steps out of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce, a slightly indifferent voice sounded. Do you still want to leave? Chapter 47. Lu Tianying's expression was indifferent, but there was a hint of ruthlessness hidden in his pitch-black eyes. Even in the Limitless Sword sect, Lu Tianying was like a moon surrounded by stars. Now, he was actually provoked by an unknown fat boy. How could he swallow this anger? Lu Tianying wasn't the only one. On the other side, the three-star blacksmith, Master Gu, also came forward. He was accompanied by several experts. One of them had an aura that made Yi Gu Chen, who was hiding in the dark, slightly tremble. A spirit expert? Yi Gu Chen was speechless. A three-star blacksmith's appeal was indeed strong. He could even order a spirit expert around. Boy, you took my mysterious silver heavy water. Do you still think you can run away? Grandmaster Gu's expression was similarly cold. He was also a person of noble status and had never suffered such humiliation. However, in the face of such a lineup, the little fatty put one hand on his waist and pointed at Lu Tianying and the others with the other. He then flipped his hand and beckoned with his finger, "Come here." The surrounding cultivators were all stunned by the little fatty's provocation. This boy is too careless. Does he not know what kind of situation he is in? Good boy. Grandmaster Gu's face flushed red as he pointed at the little fatty. The spirit expert beside him suddenly attacked. A powerful spiritual pressure poured out, causing the surrounding crowd to continuously step back. This was the power of a spirit expert. After opening the knowledge sea, the spirit pressure alone was not something an ordinary chi-refining grandmaster could resist. At the same time, Lu Tianying also erupted with his strength. Although he had yet to reach the spirit stage, he had already reached the 8th cycle of the chi-refining stage. Such strength was already considered in the upper echelons of the younger generation of the 7 great forces of the Saint Origin dynasty. Yi Gu Chen knew that the heaven prides of the 7 great forces would not be listed on the Heaven's Pride list. Most of the people on the list had never joined the 7 great forces. However, this did not mean that the Heaven's Pride list was worthless. In fact, some of the heaven prides of the 7 great forces, such as Xian Hao of the Limitless Sword Sect, were once ranked 5th on the Heaven's Pride list. Another example was Yu Shichou of the Tingxue Tower. He was ranked 4th on the Heaven Pride list, but his strength was no weaker than the other Heaven Prides of the 7 great factions. Facing a Divine Soul Realm expert and an elite disciple of the Limitless Sword Sect, the little fatty stuck out his little belly and emitted an obscure wave of sword intent. This wave of sword intent wasn't very obvious, but it was like a mountain, causing the air to freeze. Could it be that this kid really has some skills? Looking at the little fatty, whose expression would not change even if Mount Tai were to collapse in front of him, the spectating cultivators could not help but mutter. "Humph, you're just playing tricks." Lu Tianying immediately attacked. Using his finger as a sword, the 8th cycle Qi refinement realm's vigorous genuine Qi gushed out and turned into a sharp sword light at the tip of his finger as he attacked the little fatty. It was the Limitless Sword Sect's Xiantian finger art, one sword finger. At the same time, the Divine Soul Realm expert made his move. Although he wasn't from one of the 7 major powers, his strength was there for all to see. His means were also extremely powerful. Under the control of his soul strength, his majestic true chi transformed into a giant true chi hand and pressed down on the little fatty. With this method, he could suppress an ordinary chi refinement realm grandmaster with a flip of his hand. This was a method that only experts above the Divine Soul Realm could use, genuine Qi condensation. Using soul strength to control genuine Qi to condense into various forms. Under the pressure of these 2 ultimate moves, the little fatty's expression remained unchanged. The spectating cultivators all retreated dozens of feet away for fear of being affected. "Humph, you think you can deal with me with such a trivial method?" The little fatty raised his head. Just when Yi Gu Chen thought that he would use the obscure sword intent, several golden lights suddenly flashed under the little fatty's feet. However, in the next moment, the little fatty disappeared from where he stood. That's right, he disappeared. No! Yi Gu Chen's gaze suddenly turned. Dozens of feet away, a figure suddenly appeared. It was the little fatty. So fast. A hint of surprise flashed in Yi Gu Chen's eyes. That speed was something that even some rare movement techniques could not achieve. Could it be a secret technique? Yi Gu Chen guessed. Boom! On the other side, both of their moves missed. Lu Tianying and the Divine Soul Realm expert were stunned for a moment before they saw the little fatty who was dozens of feet away. How is this possible? Lu Tianying and the others were stunned. Soon after, a trace of astonishment crept onto their faces. Even they were shocked by the little fatty's ability to travel through the void. Do you really want me to use my trump card? Do you think you can catch me? The little fatty was very smug. With a despicable smile on his face, Lu Tianying and the Divine Soul Realm expert were enraged and charged forward again. However, the little fatty was like walking a dog. With his miraculous method, he played Lu Tianying and the others in circles. Boy, don't run if you have the guts. Even the Divine Soul Realm expert was a little angry out of humiliation. Sigh, this is boring. I'm going. The little fatty patted his butt and sighed. The next moment, his figure blurred. In a few breaths, he appeared thousands of feet away. Looking at the little fatty who calmly left and then at Lu Tianying whose eyes were bloodshot, the surrounding warriors sighed. At the same time, they were secretly surprised by the little fatty's origin. Some said that he was a god-favored son of a hidden force. Some said that he was an outsider of the Saint Origin dynasty. Yi Guqin was also a little curious about the little fatty. Of course, he was curious about the obscure sword essence in his body. However, the little fatty also had the mysterious silver heavy water. It was obviously more troublesome to find other mysterious silver heavy water. I can only take one step at a time. Yi Guqin did not force him. He just let nature take its course. After the auction of the Heavenly Saint Chamber of Commerce, the most eye-catching thing was naturally the sword-seeking steel. It was a grand event for sword practitioners. The sword-seeking steel was located in the Great Wild Forest, north of the Beichen Mansion. There was a sky sword peak in the Great Wild Forest, and the sword-seeking steel was located on the peak. However, not to mention whether it could withstand the sword-chi pressure of the sword-seeking steel, the Great Wild Forest alone was enough to stop many geniuses. The Sky Sword Peak was located in the core of the Great Wild Forest. In that area, there were rank 4 or rank 5 demonic beasts. In the past, there were also some unlucky geniuses who were killed before they could even climb the Sky Sword Peak. Therefore, the Great Wild Forest was like a sieve that sifted through those who were both good and bad. Only the real geniuses were qualified to climb the Sky Sword Peak. After a few days, Yi Guqin came to a capital city called Desolation City, which was close to the Great Wild Forest. Because the sword-seeking steel was about to open, Desolation City was extremely popular. Many geniuses gathered together and it was very lively. At the same time, there was no lack of friction and disputes. Blood-fighting rings could be seen everywhere in Desolation City. The blood-fighting rings were engraved with formation restrictions. If someone wanted to fight, they had to go up to the blood-fighting ring. On the blood-fighting ring, no one cared about life or death. When Yi Guqin entered Desolation City, he saw many people fighting on the blood-fighting ring. There was no lack of genius disciples from some forces. They were all young and aggressive people with extraordinary talent. Naturally, no one was willing to submit to the other. Chapter 48. Yi Guqin was not interested in it, nor was he in the mood to compete with others. He found a remote inn and prepared to refine the asparagus fruit. The geniuses who could participate in the sword-seeking steel all had their own trump cards, so Yi Guqin had to be fully prepared. The asparagus fruit was a rare medicine, more precious than the 100 veins blood ginseng. Its effect was far superior to that of the 100 veins blood ginseng. When Yi Guqin refined the asparagus fruit into his body, he felt a vigorous medicinal power flowing along his tendons and meridians. Wherever it passed, his tendons and meridians shone brightly, as if they were plated with a layer of brilliance. At the same time, the damaged sword vein in Yi Guqin's body began to repair at an amazing speed. The asparagus fruit was far more effective than the 100 veins blood ginseng. Soon, 1, 2, 3, Yi Guqin's sword vein was recovering rapidly, and his aura became stronger. The asparagus fruit was not only good for repairing tendons and meridians, but also a great tonic. His chi and blood roared in his body, and his aura rose again. The profound chi in his body surged like a tide. Boom! Yiguchin seemed to have turned into a big bell, constantly roaring. Fortunately, this place was remote, otherwise, it would have attracted a lot of attention. When Yiguchin's aura reached a critical point, it was like a volcano that had been building up for a long time, and was about to erupt. A strong profound chi aura spread out, and Yiguchin successfully advanced to the 9th level of the essence realm. He was only one step away from the chi refining realm. But this distance of one step trapped many martial artists. However, Yiguchin was not worried. It was certain that he would break through to the chi refining realm. In fact, with Yiguchin's talent, he could indeed break through to the chi refining realm quickly. But he still needed some time to accumulate. He had to completely pass the 3rd blood tribulation of the human body and achieve a perfect body before he could break through. Once he broke through, it would be amazing. Yiguchin couldn't imagine how strong it would be to break through to the chi refining realm with a perfect body, but it would definitely give him a pleasant surprise. Yiguchin was an ambitious person. Whether it was in terms of sword Dao or cultivation, he wanted to achieve perfection. After breaking through to the 9th level of the essence stage, Yiguchin's sword vein had almost fully recovered. At this moment, the 108 sword veins on the surface of Yiguchin's body emitted a lustrous light, as bright as the stars in the sky. However, within this lustrous light, there was an extremely strong power hidden. With the help of the asparagus fruit, Yiguchin finally repaired the 108 sword veins that Gu Xiaoyang had destroyed. Next, Yiguchin's goal was to cultivate the first volume of the Universal Sword Codex to the greater success stage, which was the major circulation of 360 sword veins. With the breakthrough in cultivation and the restoration of the sword veins, Yiguchin was itching to test his strength. He quietly left the inn and came to an even more desolate corner area. After taking a few steps, he saw a lush forest not far in front of him. There was a huge rock in the forest that was 6 meters tall. It was even taller than the surrounding trees. This huge rock was densely covered with sword marks. Oh, it's the sword testing rock. Yiguchin was familiar with it. Many sword cultivators would practice their swordsmanship against the rock. In his previous life, the sword demon practiced his swordsmanship against the rock in a cave on the peak of a mountain. He even left his unique skill, the 9 swords of Dugu, on the rock for future generations to practice. Yiguchin slowly approached the sword testing rock and found that it was completely black. It's actually basalt. Yiguchin thought to himself. Although basalt was not a particularly precious ore, it was not common either. It was also very expensive. Such a huge piece of basalt was worth at least 7,000 to 8,000 crystal jades. The owner of this sword testing stone must be a figure from some big power to be able to make such a big move. Yiguchin's gaze fell on the sword marks on the sword testing rock again. Basalt was famous for its hardness. Ordinary spiritual weapons would not be able to leave a scratch on it. However, the sword marks on the sword testing rock were 1 inch deep. One should not underestimate this 1 inch. To be able to leave a sword mark that was 1 inch deep on the basalt, it was enough to show that the swordsman had a strong foundation in swordsmanship. However, Yiguchin frowned slightly. With the sword demon's understanding of swordsmanship, he could naturally tell that the swordsman was a woman. Because the sword mark's trajectory was ethereal and delicate, only a woman's soft waist could display such a sword path. Such a sword move was definitely comparable to some supreme talents. Moreover, it was one of the top supreme talents. The swordsman was a rare genius female swordsman. However, in Yiguchin's eyes, such a sword move still had flaws. There are many sword marks on the sword testing rock. There are Xiantian swordsmanship and spirit-level swordsmanship. She must be a supreme talent from a powerful force. Unfortunately. Yiguchin shook his head slightly. It was agile but lacking in inner strength. Originally, according to Yiguchin's calculations, such a swordsmanship could actually be agile and elegant while containing inner strength, increasing actual combat and lethality. Yiguchin focused on actual combat. Even the sword demon in his previous life focused on actual combat when he created the 9 Dugu swords. Although the sword moves on the sword testing rock were quite good, in Yiguchin's eyes, they were a little showy and impractical. It's a rare swordsman. Yiguchin shook his head slightly. He actually had a tinge of appreciation for talent. Among women, there were very few sword cultivators. Most of the time, there was only 1 in 10,000. Yiguchin's primordial ring flashed and the calamity dust sword appeared in his hand. He did not activate his vessel meridian, nor did he activate any spiritual inscriptions. He simply drew his sword. Moreover, the swordsmanship was the most ordinary piercing moon swordsmanship. After the breakthrough in his cultivation and the restoration of his sword meridian, Yiguchin felt that his swordsmanship was smoother and his thoughts were clearer. The piercing moon swordsmanship was the most ordinary swordsmanship. It was not even graded. Some swordsmen would not even bother to cultivate such a swordsmanship. However, to Yiguchin, although there were grades in swordsmanship, there was no difference in quality. The true swordsmanship was the return of all swords. This was also thanks to the enlightenment of the sword demon, Dugu Wubai. As the swordsmanship was executed, streaks of sword light were like illusions. They exploded with dazzling sparks on the sword testing rock, leaving behind sword marks. Every sword mark was 3 inches deep. This was the result of Yiguchin not activating the power of the Calamity Dust sword and not using any spirit-level swordsmanship. After using the sword for a while, Yiguchin withdrew his sword and panted slightly. Because he had activated all the chi and blood in his body to practice the sword, it was the most exhausting, but the harvest was also great. Piercing moon swordsmanship, although it is the simplest and most ordinary, it is not simple. However, I have finally cultivated it to perfection. Yiguchin muttered to himself. He had cultivated the piercing moon swordsmanship to perfection. Chapter 49. Beginner level, higher level, basic level, profound level, perfect fusion, and martial realm. Any martial arts technique was inseparable from these 6 realms. The higher the level of cultivation, the greater the power of the martial arts technique. However, the higher the level of the 6 realms, the harder it was to cultivate. Beginner level could be reached in a few months or even a few weeks. But it might take more than a year to reach the higher level, and several years to reach the small level. After that, it was almost impossible to reach the profound level, perfect fusion, and martial realm without special opportunities or comprehension. Now, Yiguchin had cultivated the piercing moon swordsmanship to the perfect fusion realm. This realm meant that Yiguchin's comprehension of the piercing moon swordsmanship had reached the peak. It was a qualitative change, and the power of the swordsmanship would be multiplied. Even if it was an ungraded piercing moon swordsmanship, its power would be unparalleled when cultivated to this realm. After cultivating to the perfect fusion realm, the next level is the last martial arts realm, the martial realm. If I can cultivate to the martial realm, I can reach a higher level and comprehend the ultimate move of the piercing moon swordsmanship. Yiguchin's eyes lit up. Now, he had mastered the unique move of the piercing moon swordsmanship, meteor piercing moon, and the ultimate move, moonfall. Above that, he could only comprehend the ultimate move after cultivating to the martial realm. If he could perform the ultimate move of the piercing moon swordsmanship, its power would be extraordinary. Yiguchin was looking forward to it. But he knew that the reason why he could cultivate the swordsmanship to the perfect fusion realm was because the level of the piercing moon swordsmanship was too low, although the talent of the sword demon played a part. If it were a spiritual level swordsmanship, it would be difficult to comprehend it to the perfect fusion realm. For example, Yiguchin was still short of a chance to cultivate the boundless heaven swordsmanship to the basic level. However, this was already not bad. It should be known that ordinary geniuses would need several years or even longer to cultivate a spirit-level sword art to a higher level. But Yiguchin, who had the soul of the sword demon, had only cultivated for a few months. This showed that Dugu Wubai was indeed worthy of being one of the strongest sword principle experts in the underworld. If I can cultivate the sword heart in the Universal Sword Codex, with my talent, it won't be too difficult to comprehend the swordsmanship, Yi Guqian thought. The first part of the Myriad Sword Codex cultivated the sword vein while the second part refined the heart of the sword. Yi Guqian was curious about the sword heart. After practicing on the sword testing stone, Yi Guqian did not stay and left directly. It might be impolite to use someone else's sword testing stone, but Yi Guqian believed that if the owner of the sword testing stone saw this, he would not be angry. Yi Guqian had left for about 2 hours. Suddenly, a beautiful figure arrived on the waves. The beauty was a beautiful lady in her 20s. She was in a snow-colored silk dress, and her figure was elegant and beautiful. Her black hair was like clouds, and her face was as bright as the moon. Her delicate eyebrows were as beautiful as a painting. Her neck was as beautiful as a swan's, and her collarbone was slightly exposed. Her breasts were full, and her waist was slender. Although her legs were covered by the silk dress, they couldn't hide her long and slender figure. In the beauty's slender hand, she was holding a sword that was slender and slender. The sword was like her, and she was like her sword. They were both beautiful. As long as she stood there, the surrounding heaven and earth seemed to radiate brilliance. This beauty held her sword and stood in front of the sword testing rock. Just as she was about to start practicing, her delicate body suddenly stiffened. That beautiful and exquisite face that made it hard for people to shift their gazes also seemed to have frozen. "Sister Heng Shui, what's wrong?" A young lady in a yellow dress walked over. Seeing that the beauty didn't move, she asked. If Yi Guqian was here, he wouldn't be unfamiliar with this young lady. She was Situ Ling, whom he had met a few times before. This beautiful lady in a silk dress was naturally the pearl of the Situ family. Her appearance was famous in the Saint Origin dynasty, Situ Hongxue. How is this possible? Situ Hongxue didn't seem to hear Situ Ling's voice. Her starry eyes were absent-minded as she stared at the sword mark on the sword test rock. What's wrong? Situ Ling also looked at the sword test rock. How is this possible? My sword path has been completely broken. Not only the Xiantian sword technique, but also the 4 seasons sword technique. Situ Hongxue was in disbelief. The 4 seasons sword technique was one of the Situ family's spirit sword techniques. It had the vitality of spring, the blazing of summer, the chilling of autumn, and the biting cold of winter. The sword technique changed between the 4 seasons. It was extremely powerful, and it wasn't any weaker than the Murong family's mysterious heaven sword technique. However, such a powerful 4 seasons sword technique had actually been countered. Furthermore, it had been countered by the simplest sword technique. This sword technique can't be wrong. The piercing moon sword technique. Situ Hongxue was dumbfounded. Although she didn't practice the piercing moon sword technique, she had seen others practice it before. Naturally, she knew that the 3-inch deep sword mark was left behind by the piercing moon sword technique. Sister Hongxue, could it be? Although Situ Ling didn't practice the sword technique, she still saw some clues. Is this returning to one's natural state? Using the inferior piercing moon sword technique to break the 4 seasons sword technique? Although it's only on the sword test rock. Situ Hongxue frowned. She was like a little girl holding her heart. However, this person didn't have any other intentions. He just pointed out some of the flaws in the 4 seasons sword technique. Situ Hongxue was a little absent-minded as she muttered to herself. She was a proud daughter of the heavens since she was young. She was the beloved daughter of the Situ clan. Moreover, in the path of sword cultivation, although she wasn't extremely talented, she was still one of the best. In Situ Hongxue's eyes, the 4 seasons sword technique that she practiced was already close to perfection. Moreover, she had practiced it to the peak of a higher level and was not even close to a small success. However, on the sword test rock, the piercing moon sword technique had pointed out many flaws in the Four Seasons sword technique that she had used. In other words, if these flaws were known by someone in actual combat and then targeted, the power of Situ Hongshue's Four Seasons sword technique would be greatly reduced. Moreover, the opponent might even find the flaws and break the Four Seasons sword technique in one go. Who is it? Who is it? Situ Hongxue thought to herself. Could it be him? Murong. No, it shouldn't be possible. He definitely wouldn't practice the piercing moon sword technique. That heroic and imposing figure first appeared in Situ Hongshue's mind, but she immediately rejected it. She knew that with Murong Ditian's pride, he definitely wouldn't practice the piercing moon sword technique. So, who was it? Chapter 50. Situ Hongxue could not figure it out, but the only thing she was sure of was that the person who left the sword mark on the sword testing stone was definitely a sword Dao master who had an extraordinary understanding of the sword Dao. This was not a sword Dao master, but someone who already had an extremely deep understanding of the sword Dao. Situ Hongxue had never seen a sword cultivator who had such an understanding before. Even some of the sword Dao experts in his family were far inferior to the person who had left a sword mark on the sword testing stone in terms of comprehension of the sword. However, although this person's understanding of the sword Dao is extremely deep, his cultivation is not very high. He did not leave behind a trace of true qi. Or could it be that he intentionally hid it? This was what Situ Hongxue was most puzzled about. If it was the former, then Situ Hongxue could only confirm that this person was definitely a sword Dao genius who could be called monstrous. If it was the latter, then this person had returned to his original state and his cultivation was definitely unfathomable. However, no matter which it was, Situ Hongxue was still curious. Seeing Situ Hongxue staring at the sword testing stone in a daze, Situ Ling tried to call out, "Big Sister Hongxue?" It was the first time that she had seen such a vivid expression on Situ Hongshue's beautiful face. Surprise, confusion, puzzlement, curiosity. Situ Hongxue was a famous beauty in the Saint Origin dynasty. In addition to her outstanding background, as well as her talent and strength, she was pursued and flattered by countless people. However, Situ Hongshue's beautiful face was always calm. She was clearly a girl in her 20s, but her state of mind was like an ancient well that had no ripples. This was the first time that Situ Ling had seen Situ Hongshue's expression change so much. Even when Situ Hongxue had announced her engagement with Murong Ditian, she still had an indifferent expression. TSK. Just who is it? Just a few sword scars on the sword testing stone is enough to make Big Sister Hongshue's heart flustered. Situ Ling couldn't help but mutter to herself. On the other hand, Situ Hongxue tightened her grip on her sword. Situ Hongshue's sword was called Wang Ning Mei. The sword was long and slender. The blade was like a woman's eyebrows. It was delicate yet extremely sharp. Moreover, there were some mysterious and complicated patterns on the sword. This Wang Ning Mei was a spiritual inscription divine weapon. Although it was only a low-grade spiritual inscription divine weapon, it was still very rare. Ha! Situ Hongxue shouted and raised her sword. Her snow-white dress fluttered in the wind like a graceful swan, like a swimming dragon. Her posture did not seem like she was wielding a sword, but more like she was dancing a beautiful dance. Even though Situ Hongxue often saw Situ Hongxue practicing her sword, every time she saw it, she would still gasp in surprise. The Situ Hongxue who was practicing her sword was another kind of beauty. Situ Hongshue's sword path was sometimes cold and austere. Sometimes, it was like spring wind and rain. It was the Situ clan's Four Seasons sword technique. However, after experiencing it on the sword testing stone, Situ Hongxue clearly felt that there were some flaws in her previous sword moves. And these flaws were now being filled up bit by bit. All of this was due to the ordinary sword scars on the sword testing stone. Situ Hongxue, who was obsessed with the sword Dao, felt a kind of joy from the bottom of her heart. This kind of joy was something that she had not experienced for a long time after knowing that she was going to be engaged with Murong Ditian. After practicing the sword for a while, Situ Hongxue was slightly out of breath, and sparkling beads of sweat appeared on her fair forehead. She also left a new sword scar on the sword testing stone. Sister Hongxue, are you going to continue waiting here? Situ Ling asked. Let's wait a little longer. Situ Hongxue looked at the sword scar on the sword testing stone and said. Although she was a woman, there was a trace of arrogance in her heart. It was not arrogance, but confidence in her own sword Dao. She wanted to know if that person could still find a flaw in the improved Four Seasons sword technique. But unfortunately, after waiting for a few hours, that person still did not appear. Situ Hongxue felt a little regretful. Situ Hongxue sighed in her heart. In the entire Saint Origin dynasty, there was only one person who could make a peerless beauty like Situ Hongxue willingly wait for him. However, at this moment, Yi Guqin did not know that there was a great beauty waiting for him. After practicing on the sword testing stone, Yi Guqin casually walked in the desolate city. There was still some time before the sword-seeking steel erupted with sword qi. Yi Guqin was not in a hurry to enter the great desolate forest. Yi Guqin casually walked in the desolate city. From time to time, he would look at the geniuses fighting each other in the blood-fighting arena. He was quite relaxed. What sword cultivator? You're just a useless person. Suddenly, an extremely disdainful and cold voice came from the blood-fighting arena in front of him. Hearing this, Yi Guqin suddenly raised his eyebrows. He looked around and saw that the blood-fighting arena in front of him was completely surrounded. Many cultivators were watching the battle. There were two figures in the blood-fighting arena. One of them was a young man lying on the ground. His clothes were torn, and there were many wounds on his body. Even the sword in his hand had fallen to the side. He looked quite miserable. The other person was a burly man in black clothes. He held a bright golden saber in his hand. It was a supreme-grade spiritual weapon. He looked arrogant and looked at the young man lying on the ground with disdain in his eyes. This is the so-called sword cultivator with the best attack. It's just a so-so. The saber is the real leader of all weapons. The sword is just a pretty embroidered pillow. The burly man in black walked forward and stepped on the sword that had fallen to the ground. Don't step on my sword. The young man on the ground crawled and reached out to hold the sword. A trace of coldness flashed in the burly man's eyes. He stepped down hard and was about to break the young man's hand and sword. At this moment, an extremely sharp sword qi suddenly broke through the air. The burly man in black's heart skipped a beat. He hurriedly blocked it with his saber. Clang! An ear-piercing sound of metal clashing was heard. The burly man in black took several steps back. His hand was numb from the impact. Who is it? The burly man in black was shocked and angry. He was an expert in the third rank of the qi refining realm. How could he be forced to retreat? A young man in a black robe walked up to the blood-fighting ring with an indifferent expression. It was Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin was not a meddlesome person and did not like to meddle in other people's business. However, the burly man in front of him could not insult the sword. Whether it was in his previous life or this life, whether it was Dugu Wubai or Yi Guqin, they could not tolerate others insulting the sword. The sword was the life of a swordsman. Insulting the sword was insulting the dignity of a swordsman. Hold your sword well. Don't insult it. Yi Guqin tilted his head slightly and said to the young man beside him. The young man gritted his teeth and picked up the sword that had fallen to the ground. He bowed sincerely to Yi Guqin. Who is this person? How dare he meddle in other people's business? Doesn't he know how powerful that burly man is? His saber skills are enough to make one's scalp tingle. Some of the martial artists who were watching the battle discussed. Chapter 51. Brat, I'm afraid you don't know where I'm from. The man in black said coldly. Saber conferred King Palace. Yiguchin's lips curled into an indifferent smile. Aside from the saber conferred King Palace, Yiguchin couldn't think of any other place to be so disgusted with swords. How dare you meddle in my business when you know? The man in black said coldly. The way of the blade and the way of the sword are different from person to person. Everyone takes what they need. However, you deliberately promote the way of the blade and belittle the way of the sword. This is ignorance. Yigu Chen's primordial ring flashed and the calamity dust sword fell into his hand. I was wondering why you're a useless sword cultivator. The man in black said disdainfully. You'll know once you try. Yiguchin didn't say anything else. His profound chi surged and his aura erupted. The aura of a level 9 essence martial artist was fully revealed. What? He's only at the 9th level of the essence origin realm? Yigu Chen's cultivation level was revealed, and the surrounding warriors were dumbfounded. They thought that since Yiguchin decided to fight, he must be strong. However, they didn't expect that Yiguchin hadn't even reached the Qi refining realm. He dares to challenge a Qi refining realm cultivator at the Qi refining realm. Is he really courageous or stupid? Some of the spectators shook their heads. After seeing Yiguchin's cultivation, the man in black's face turned gloomy. You're making a fool of me. You dare to attack me when you're only at the level 9 essence martial artist? The man in black was furious. Although he wasn't as strong as those on the heavenly saber list in the saber-conferred King Palace, he was still somewhat famous. Now, he was being looked down upon by a sword cultivator at the level 9 essence martial artist. Die. Life and death were not important in the blood fighting ring. Therefore, the man in black wanted to kill Yiguchin decisively. His true chi surged and poured into his golden saber. The golden saber instantly emitted a dazzling golden light. An incomparably powerful saber chi burst out and went straight for Yiguchin. The third cycle of the chi refinement realm was not much of a threat to Yiguchin. Yang Kai's blood and chi surged from his body, accompanied by the aura of the 9th stage of the essence origin stage. Furthermore, he had used the Xiantian sword art, Aurora Swift Sword's unique skill, Aurora's Passing. That dazzling sword light was beautiful, like the aurora in the sky, but it contained the sharpest cold light. After being reforged by the old drunkard, the tribulation dust had reached a whole new level. It originally only had 26 weapon veins, but now it had 42 weapon veins. There was no doubt that the more vessel veins one had, the more powerful the spirit artifact would be. Yiguchin reckoned that the current Jia Chen could be considered a middle-grade weapon even among the divine weapons with spiritual inscriptions. When this sword was unleashed, the sword light directly tore through the saber chi and charged towards the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man's expression abruptly changed. He had clearly sensed that Yiguchin was not as weak as he had imagined. Boom! The black-clothed man blocked with his saber, but the terrifying sword light almost bent the golden saber. A violent vibration came from both of his hands, numbing his arms. Yiguchin would not hold back and attacked again. The vessel veins on the tribulation dust were lit up one by one, and the sword became even more dazzling, like a long-dormant lion that had been awakened. Yiguchin was pleasantly surprised. He did not expect the old drunkard's forging skills to be so good. Although the tribulation dust was an extraordinary divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions, it had reached its peak after being reforged by the old drunkard. With the support of 42 vessel veins, the power of the tribulation dust had reached a terrifying level. The sword light on the tip of the sword made the surrounding warriors' scalps tingle. A top-grade spirit artifact? No, it's definitely better than a top-grade spirit artifact. It's a divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions. No wonder he dares to attack with only the cultivation of the essence origin stage. The surrounding people exclaimed. Although one's cultivation was important to measure one's strength, spiritual artifacts, martial arts, and secret techniques were also a part of one's strength. Yiguchin drew his sword, and the sword light was accompanied by lightning. Rumble. A thunderous rumble resounded, as though the 9 heavens had rumbled. It was the horizontal lightning sword's ultimate move, sudden thunder. The sword light was as fast as lightning as it shot towards the black-clothed man. The black-clothed man gritted his teeth. He knew that Yiguchin was difficult to deal with, and he could imagine the consequences if he did not go all out. Golden Lion Blade Art, Sky Lion Slash. The black-clothed man circulated the true energy in his body, and rays of golden light rose from his golden saber, vaguely forming the shape of a golden lion. Of course, the golden lion was illusory because only experts at the divine soul realm and above could form it with their true energy. However, it also showed how extraordinary this blade art was. It's actually a top-grade Xiantian blade art from the saber-conferred royal palace. There were some knowledgeable people among the spectators, and they immediately recognized that it was an extremely sharp blade art from the saber-conferred royal palace. Boom! The illusory golden lion collided with the sword light, and the resulting shockwaves caused the ceiling array on the blood battle arena to tremble. Break! Yiguchin's blood essence erupted, and the illusory image of a dragon and elephant formed around him. At this moment, he possessed the strength of a dragon and elephant, and the sword light was even more powerful. At the same time, the Calamity Dust Sword released a glaring brilliance. A spiritual rune lit up on the sword. The Calamity Dust Sword released an even greater power, and an extremely sharp sword aura gushed out. At this moment, Yiguchin had finally activated the Calamity Dust Sword's Broken Edge spiritual rune. This was also the first time Yiguchin had used the true power of a spiritual rune weapon. Just as the Broken Edge spiritual tattoo was activated, the extremely sharp sword light tore the phantom of the golden lion apart as easily as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The black-clothed man's face changed drastically, and he circulated all his true energy to block the attack with his golden saber. The tip of the Calamity Dust Sword touched the golden saber, and Yiguchin's eyes flashed with sharpness. Break! Crack! Something that caused all the surrounding martial warriors to be dumbfounded happened. On the golden blade, cracks spread out from the tip of the sword as the center. One must know that the golden saber was a supreme-grade spiritual artifact, and it wasn't something that an ordinary spiritual artifact could compare to. However, Yiguchin had done it. The Broken Edge spiritual rune was known for its ability to pierce through armor, and the sword aura it released was too sharp. Yiguchin's wrist shook, and the Calamity Dust Sword released a glaring sword light. The golden saber shattered under the black-clothed man's shocked gaze. The black-clothed man was also struck by the sword aura, and his face turned red as he spat out a mouthful of blood. At the same time, his body was pierced by the fragments of the golden saber, and he flew out with blood dripping from his wounds. He collapsed on the ground, heavily injured. The surrounding people were dumbfounded. Who was this young man? He actually possessed such a divine weapon. At the same time, Yiguchin's ruthless methods had shocked them. He didn't show any mercy to the disciples of the saber-conferred monarch hall. Boom! The moment Yiguchin sent the black-clothed man flying, a powerful saber aura suddenly charged towards Yiguchin. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.